Hey guys, thanks for showing up. Because all the people who were supposed to show up to lead this panel haven't. So, and they're not answering their phones, and they're definitely not in the building. No, they're not, it's okay. I gave up on them. So, we have an open panel for discussion. Yeah. So, the topic is whatever you want it to be, right? I got all sorts of ideas, but who cares? Exactly. This is going to be probably the best talk of the night because it's about whatever we want it to be. Oh, yeah. Here, do you want to tell us what your talk is going to be on?
Yeah, I mean, if you guys want to stay for 5 o'clock, we're going to talk about decentralizing justice. Justice is one of those things that society provides, just like money. If we're going to decentralize money, why not the criminal justice system too? Little break from blockchain heady stuff. Anyways.
Yeah, so I'm curious if anyone wants to volunteer to seed this panel and has anything that they want to discuss. We're talking anything, right? What is the meaning of life?
Decentralizing justice.
I don't know. Let's talk about it.
Justice, one
yeah,
of those
so
things that
does anyone want to join me up here?
Just like money. If we're going to decentralize
I know
money,
you'll be up here. Oh, Spawn, Matt, yes.
So I want to toss up the topic of your chatbot, your Matrix chatbot that you're using in the Riot channel, right?
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about like the reasoning behind it? So what purpose does it serve for you guys, and how do you see it help your group in the future?
Wait, Deem, don't go anywhere. Did you hear his? Hey, Deem, did you hear his question? He was asking about the chatbot. Would you be down to sit down for a second? Deem actually made the chatbot. It was originally, the goal was simply to automate the reward DAO system, where we're trying to solve this issue of volunteers, like how do volunteers get paid, but we don't want to pay them directly because we can't pay them enough. That's why we get volunteers. This is a constant problem, right? Volunteer retention and showing appreciation. And so what we did is we created a system where we could dish points, and those points will eventually result in money, but like a month later, maybe a month and a half later, right? And it's really not about paying people as much as it is just saying, wow, we're putting this bounty up for the community, like we're paying the community like an employee, and it's going to be shared amongst people. Who knows how much you're going to get? Know that it's not going to equate to a wage, but it will equate to something, and that we appreciate you pushing the community forward, right? But we were using this Excel spreadsheet, and then Deem heroically stepped up with another guy, Trey, to push this chatbot forward. And it was originally just to create points, but then it became so useful because Riot is this really cool like system where you can use it, and it's open source, and you can like integrate things to it. And so now we're using it to also auto respond when people enter a room to say, hey, how's it going? And ideally it'll also be used for Giveth one day to help build the community, right? Because every time someone creates a community to, like, let's say end homelessness in Berlin, they will be able to they'll instantly have a Riot room that will have a lot of cool things, a lot of cool infrastructure built in that will say, hey, guess what? Someone just donated to this. Or maybe even one day we'll be able to donate straight through Riot, kind of like you can status. Right? I mean, there's going to be a lot of potential here, but of course it just starts with just having the bot. And I mean, Deem, I would love to hear what your thoughts are, because this is your baby, right?
Yeah, so the Riot bot is making everything, well, communication right now easier for Giveth, especially when you're joining different rooms. So we have different rooms in the, Giveth community in Riot, and like when you join one room, it will make it a specific message for that room, so you know what's going on in that specific room. So that's one of the use cases of the bot right now. and yeah.
So I remember seeing people or initiatives trying to like use these chatbots also to sort of automate things so that it doesn't only now you can say like dish a number of points to that guy or to that avatar, and will do so. Or have you looked or do you plan to look into like automating stuff like actually doing transactions, for example, on Ethereum through the bots? I know that people have been working on that, but I really haven't checked into any of these projects or initiatives lately. So I was just wondering if you guys are following up on that.
Yeah. So originally, I think the idea was to like getting these. So instead of dishing out points, you would dish out tokens, and I guess these would be at the end of the month. These would be turned into Ether, where you could call the contract, and you will get Ether by the end of the month. So that's what we the end goal of the with the point spot. I think. So yeah, that's on the roadmap at least.
I think it's super exciting to see that. I just joined a talk about Riot in the current state of Matrix as a protocol, and yeah, the way that it's just architecture and like the whole power of that community. I mean, the amount of clients there are out there, the server implementations in all kind of languages, and I mean they're looking at like scaling that up so that you can have like he was mentioning numbers like. I think it was 6,000 members that can be part of one room and so forth. So like it's super scalable. And he did a demo where they had some sort of a video chat in 3D. So they use like an iPhone. It has like two streams, like one video stream and like one depth stream, and they combine it in some sort of a virtual reality room. And so they demoed it actually it was pretty amazing. So you really had like a 3D representation. And one of the use cases that they use it for is that's sort of the problem is in these traditional video chat applications that everybody's looking down from his camera because you're looking at the face of whoever you're talking to, but it creates some sort of an awkward off-edge thing, like people don't appear to be looking at you but looking somewhere else. And with those kind of solutions you can compensate for that, so you can move yourself higher or lower, so the points that you're looking at on your screen actually so it looks like you have eye contact with whoever you're video chatting with. So I mean they're working on all these amazing things, so I think it's very exciting to see how that can be integrated through these bots.
And the thing is, everything like the Matrix protocol and what we are using internally for the bot is like open source, and we got a great documentation on like how to use it, and so that's the great thing about open source. So right now the bot has like so I was the one that started the points bot as together with Tay Trey, but then people joined in. So I also another one that has been integrating the chat feature. Frederik Bolding is also coming along in this community now, and helping with the bot. So we got this collaboration happening now with the Giveth bot. So it's not only one person, but like it's a whole community trying to make the bot better. Yeah.
Do you want to? Well, I want to just say that this all came. We chose Riot for this reason because it's a really nice open source protocol. A while ago, Slack kind of kicked all the crypto people off, they didn't kick us off, but they were clearly insecure, and they weren't willing to change during the ICO craziness. Like, there were clear security holes for our application, and Slack refused to support our use of their application, basically because we weren't paying and we were hacking their software a little bit. You weren't supposed to invite anybody. Slack was made specifically to be controlled, right? Like a controlled space, not an open space. And so there was this big exodus from Slack, and people went everywhere. They went to Discord, they went to Riot, they went to Rocket Chat, and a lot of people just went to Telegram. And now we chose Riot because of all the cool stuff that we saw happening and being pushed forward. It was Status started supporting them, and it just looked like it would be so easy to integrate it into the Ethereum stack as a supporting protocol. And the point spot really, I think, is the exclamation point on saying that we made the right move, and that eventually, because Riot is definitely young and it doesn't have a lot of the features that we want, like unread messages, you know, and these little things. But guess what? You can make a pull request, you know, and in fact, you could hack it in yourself, and that's the kind of shit I like working with. So, Keeley.
Yeah, on this topic in particular, because we at CDM actually completely migrated over from Slack to Riot, particularly because Giveth, y'all were in there, and so we started using it. As far as the adoption curve, it did take a little while to, dive into it, understand it, but now we love the layout, love using it. Super excited about it. Really the only feature that I would like to see added is like being able to put the emojis on messages. You can reply to them. But a particular challenge we've seen is in getting people that are not, haven't used it, but use Slack, is getting them onboarded into it. And so I was wondering if anyone had any strategies or tips for getting people that maybe aren't necessarily in blockchain or crypto, or maybe are a little reluctant to try something new, to figure out how to use Riot.
Yeah, well, the very easy thing that, I don't know, I missed the beginning of the conversation, but the very easy thing that we do that helps is that we have bridged all our channels between Slack and Riot. So people still, because many people know Slack and they have it on their computer for work purposes for other Slack channels they are in, and then they come and Giveth, they might choose Slack first, but they see very quickly that we are not on Slack. If they want to talk to us, they have to come to Riot, and they see that the way how we put our hyperlinks, etc., because we just use Markdown, they see that we're not in Slack, and so if they want to have the full experience, it's better for them to come to Riot. So we promote all the time, telling them like, hey, the Giveth unicorns, that's us, are actually in Riot, so come and join us. So they get the bot helps for that as well, because with the bot the great bot that Deem created, which is now our Giveth bot, our welcoming bot, we send them direct messages and we let them know this is how Riot works, and this really helps for people to understand how easy it is, and that is something that was missing. Like, how do you do the basic things? One of you mentioned liking and putting emojis on messages, reactions. Another thing that I really got very distracted by is that all the different rooms are pinging all the time. They're giving notifications. So not only the ones that you were tagged in, and I didn't understand, like, in the beginning, like, okay, get all messages loud, noisy. There's like one of these settings, and so the bot now just sends a message, hey, just if you want to be notified once in a while, put all your rooms on mention only. It's like a simple thing that helps people, like, oh, this is how it works. Hey, and this is the community with all the rooms. And that's another way that gets them in and facilitates it for them. And that's all possible because it's open source, and that we just hooked our robot in there, and it was like welcoming everyone, sending them public messages, sending them direct messages based on the topic of the room they're in. So it's I'm a huge fan. I think Griff can confirm that I was the person that was most against Riot in the beginning. I was like really blocking it, and now I'm the biggest fan because it's possible to add these things. I never open Slack anymore. So yeah.
What I also learned from a talk earlier is that apparently, so they have some sort of an identity server or identity part in the protocol where you actually create your accounts to participate on the Matrix protocol, sort of. And apparently they're also modularizing that so that you could maybe even join using an Ethereum address later on or something. So you don't have to subscribe anymore or create an account, but you can just say, like, this is my like identity module for my group, and you could just very easily onboard. So if you are subscribed to I don't know, or maybe you've created an account in a dApp already, then maybe you can just use those, I would say credentials, but in that it's not a credential anymore. Then you just like proof, like this is my address, and then you automatically get added to the group, or you can use it to authenticate yourself. And also they have apparently a new version coming out now for their web client. So the Riot web version. So we showed a demo from that, and yeah, it looks pretty swell.
And they're working on a new design, right? Complete overhaul.
Oh yeah, so that was one of the thing they showed a preview from. It's not released yet, but it looks pretty good. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to say, if you're interested about like how this works, like how we did it with the bot. So we have a post. So if you go to medium.com/giveth, there's a post that explains how and why we created the bot and what it all does with links to the repo and how we can integrate it.
Awesome. So to shift gears a little bit and thinking about decentralization, we need to have everyone be included in the process and those decisions. And so something that I haven't really seen talked a lot about at this conference in particular is thinking about like how do we get the most wide variety of perspectives and users into the process. So in thinking of like along the lines of diversity inclusion, I think you know, if we could talk about maybe where we have strengths in the blockchain and crypto space, but also where we could have improvements. So I think from like a global perspective, there's a lot of nationalities represented, a lot of different languages spoken, but what I haven't seen much of, I guess, is from an accessibility standpoint. How are we designing products to service people that are maybe blind, hard of hearing, less mobile? Also in thinking of like gender equality and bringing more women and non-binary folks into the mix, and then also, you know, people of color, people of different races. How do we, as a community, make sure that we're getting everyone included so that we can really have, you know, decentralization that is inclusive of, you know, all the beautiful humans in this world.
Yeah, just a quick thing. Yeah, just before we were going to pick a topic, and then I thought of an idea. Then Griff said, "Oh yeah, you've got an idea." And that was exactly what I was going to say around inclusiveness and just accessibility and like, but maybe in two different dimensions. But yeah, maybe we'll start with your one. So, who has a point on that?
Yeah, no, yeah, I don't know if you did, but it's a very good point, and it's like we were watching people getting off the tram yesterday, going to the conference. I was like, okay, it's all guys, so this must be the conference. These are all developers. So yeah, I think in general that in the blockchain community there's still a lot of work in that sense, if you want to put it like that. But I think it's just, I think personally that it's gonna come gradually. What I do love a lot about this entire community is that it's in its attitude extremely open and embracing, and it's not just the technology, but it's always like, you know, technology comes in language, comes in culture, and all these things. And I have, to be honest, never in my life felt more included in a community than here. I was writing a little bit on the values of Giveth, and to me vulnerability is one of the most important ones, that you can dare to be yourself. And I feel that this is possible here because there's no hierarchy, so there's not ego. Is actually when people have their egos coming up too much, it's not really appreciated, and it's like you have to show, you have to just work and get the things done. And if you don't, I've struggled it with myself personally, like some points in projects coming in with too much ego because I was insecure and I wanted to prove myself. But very soon you realize that's not how this is gonna roll here. You just have to just be you, and that's enough. And bring your value. And having this attitude is gonna attract more people. And I think that's how communities often work. You show them what you stand for. So I would say, in short, or my answer would be like, focusing a little bit on these values of the community is gonna show to other people, hey, I align with these values, I want to know more about this. Maybe I don't know the technology, but I get what they stand for, I believe in what they stand for, so yes, and that will attract people. It attracted me, and it attract people I know, so yeah.
Yeah, as far as like how do we include other people with other ideas and like you know, it's a really tough problem to solve. Have any of you ever used WeChat?
Yeah.
Dude, I don't get it. WeChat doesn't make any sense to me. And there's like a famous story of the CEO of Reddit who married Serena Williams, and she goes on Reddit and she doesn't have a fucking clue. It doesn't make sense. The interface makes no sense. And I feel like blockchain has kind of set itself up to be like Reddit, where it's made for, you know, like young white guys, right? And so it's that in a lot of ways that's good, just like WeChat is designed for Chinese people who eyes naturally go a certain direction. They are used to using certain applications in a certain ways, and they're trained already. So it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy, or the snake eating itself. I don't know what analogy is right there, but it's one of these things where the design so far for blockchain has not been inclusive. It's been focused on its current user base, and it's time to grow, right? And this points to a general problem with crypto, which is the user experience sucks, even for white dudes, right? It sucks for everyone. So I think that it's one of these things where it takes time. It takes for the opportunity for diversity to come into the space. We need a huge influx of UX designers. I'm actually trying to interview UX designers every day, almost, to bring them in for various positions, and they know that I think they know that it's going to be more inclusive, and it will happen naturally when the user base grows. I think there's only, like, if you look at the apps that are in the dApps on Ethereum, there's less than 10,000 daily users. I mean, that's pretty pathetic. So, yeah, it's, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but at least that's some status.
And I think that not only does it take time and opportunity, those are like both passive things, right? But it takes like actively reaching out. Like, we can't just be like, sit back and be like, yeah, let them come. They're not going to come if it's not a space for them. So how do we reach out to that? And like, who was your friend that we met with outside of Jordy's that like bought the DevCon ticket, who's doing the stuff in Mexico? Rafa was talking some really amazing stuff about like how to like make crypto loan apps like accessible to poor Mexican people. Like what type of interface really makes them want to use it and makes it easier for them than going to the payday loans place down the block. And I think just it takes like each and every one of us calling on like what are the exploited communities that we're connected to, that we have like a personal understanding of what it is they need, so that we can represent that in this space. Like for me, like I'm connected with a lot of anti-racism activists in Seattle that are like poor people of color activists that need things that nonprofits can't provide them. So like I kind of bring that to where I am, but I have to constantly like speak up about it and kind of yell, because it's like there's this thing in these crypto organizations where it's like, no, let's just get our idea out there, and like there's so much work to do on executing our mission, but we have to still take time to remember like, hey, what is the piece that I carry of the rest of the world that I can bring into this, even if you need to slow down on some other elements in order to listen to that.
Totally. Yeah, just on I guess the two elements of inclusion. One is in the community, like the developer community. In Sydney, I run an IoT meetup, and similar to the blockchain space or tech space in general, it's a majority men, very few women. And each month we meet up, I'm thinking, what can I do about this? And then I just had to approach the women who came, and I said, look, what can I do to make this better? It's listening and taking action. And that's perhaps the same for the product level as well. It's about asking what problem are you solving, who are you solving it for, and hearing it from their point of view. But to take the practical example of the guys in the IoT space, and then asking them what they want, some of it was around just having a welcoming thing, that when people come in, have a bit of an introduction round. So once people have come in, everyone sort of says their name, says what they're doing, and that just puts sort of like a bit of comfort to know that there's someone has a name. Oh, they're interested in what I want to ask them about. Makes them more approachable. And also there was some statistics in groups of women, groups of people in a room. If there's 1 or 2 women, it's quite difficult. But once you get 3 or 4, it's suddenly more comfortable. And I probably should ask that as a question rather than say that's a fact. But but in general, there are some things around there. So I'm very mindful of numbers and just trying to see what can I do to actively bring people in. Same with recruitment. I needed to get a designer for this game I was trying to work on. And so I reached out to the community and explicitly said at the front, right now we already have 3 guys in the company. We would like to hire for women first, so women to the front of the queue, please. And then you get people that will criticize that choice to put that so up front. But on the other hand, I think it's only right because that's the population, and people should be more aware of it and check their sort of biases at the door. So.
So we're talking a lot from the side of how do you approach people to get into this space. I think one of the other ways to do it, if you're a little bit more like an introvert maybe, and you're not like a kind of guy that goes out there, is to actually very, very clearly shape your story, right? Like, what do you want to see in the world? What kind of change do you want to see? What is it that you want to build or to organize for? And I think the more clear and the smaller you make that story, and maybe even the more radical you make that story, the more easily it is for people to actually say, like, yeah, that's something I want to be part of, or that I like, or no, I hate that. I really don't like that. So I think we should also put like a big effort in how we express what we actually want to build or want to see in the world. I think a lot of times, especially in this space, we keep it very broad and very general in the hope that we attract as many people as possible. Well, actually, I think you stand like a better chance if you make it very small, the story, kind of radical, so people can bounce off or join the thing. That's just like maybe a different approach into attracting people to a specific cause.
And I'd definitely be curious if anyone knows of any resources or groups that are focusing on this issue, and I can offer a few. So on Telegram, there's a group called Crypto Queers to get LGBTQ people connected, share opportunities, and then for CDM, after our next charity is Slave Free Trade, but after that, we're partnering with Women of Color in Blockchain, which is really trying to bring more women of color into the blockchain space. So I'm curious if anyone else has any groups like that or initiatives that they've heard of. Yeah, I can add. Anyone that wants to join.
Yeah, do you know of blockchain for women groups that already exist? Because there should be some, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a large group called Women in Blockchain that I haven't contacted or talked to, but I've been around on their website. Kile and I are also kind of starting a project to just formulate these questions. We've noticed there's these common resistances that people have to blockchain, especially people who are oppressed folks. They're poor, or they're people of color, or they are just really not technologically involved. And we've been noticing we've been having kind of redundant conversations. People have the same fears about coming towards this, and so we're kind of starting a project to answer those questions in one force. It might start as like a frequently asked questions page, and move into maybe like a webinar or a skit would be really fun. But yeah, if anyone has experience with those kind of resistances, like a super common one when I talk to like environmental activists, they're always like, yeah, but blockchain is not a great solution because look at how much energy it takes. I mean, it's worse, So like we encounter this again and again and again. It's like, let's have a unified force on how to like educate people around this. Yeah, I don't really know of other projects at the moment.
Isn't Crypto Chicks is also a group, right? There's they have Crypto Chick meetups, and there's like and Crypto Girls. I think there's at least 2 or 3 different ones that are out there right now. So that's another one. Crypto Vixens, right? So that's another one. So I think the initiatives are popping up, and that's how it goes, right? You have like now more and more people are coming into the space, and first you have this core group, and then it grows and grows, and like you get the diversity comes in a way, and then it's good to nurture that. So like starting all these initiatives.
And I guess this like it isn't the first time we're sort of started an industry that started quite skewed in this sense. So the tech industry in general, this is a bit of deja vu in that regard with regards to the not so much discrimination, but not as much inclusion. And the same thing goes in terms of language. There's a meetup group in Sydney around men championing change for women, which is around, okay, yes, there's maybe an imbalance in an industry, but what is it that men can do? And there's often women speakers saying, hey, these things would be helpful. And one of the things I picked up from that meetup was the language of a job application, for example, or maybe a language of a report. If you're saying, we're looking for code warriors, or we're looking for code ninjas, that generally has a skew that that is more appealing to men than women, more generally. Again, probably not all cases. And there's probably like some more resources on that I wouldn't know about. But there's little subtle things in terms of our language, and you know, are we sort of all high-fiving in a way that's somehow exclusive? Exclusive. I don't know. Like, you know, the flip side would be that we have too many nuances that we have to be mindful of, then suddenly we lose our rhythm. But it's a matter of just flowing fairly and inclusively.
Yeah, I think an important thing when you remind me of the fact like there's a lot of nuances that you have to think about and so on. Yeah, I've been. The thing is, I don't believe at all in being politically correct, and I think most of us are not, in the sense that we're too awake to be that. But at the same time, I think this vulnerability is important. So, giving the example of there was a very nice guy who recently joined our riot, and he was very apologetic almost that he joined us, and we said, yeah, just introduce yourself, you want to do something, tell us what you're capable of, and he just opened up. He felt welcome, and he told his story that I think he had suffered a depression. I'm not mentioning any names, it doesn't matter. And he was out of a job right now, but he told also his like background and why he believes in what we do, etc. And now he's working on 4 or 5 different projects within and linked to Giveth. And to me, that's so beautiful. Like, if you give the people, if you show them this is a safe place, then they can be who they want to be, whoever or whatever that is. And I think Giveth is a great example of such a safe environment, and I think more and more of such groups are going to come. To me, it's one of our core goals to actually provide that to people. Like, hey, you're safe here. Be crazy, and that's also a beautiful thing of blockchain in general. I think that people just can be anonymous and they can take another name. They're never forced to come to meetings, to dress up, they can be whoever they invent. And we have had people in meetings who never put on, because we do mostly video calls, who never put on their camera, and that's fine. They don't have to. They can be completely anonymous, and that's fine. Just be yourself, be comfortable, and I think that's already a very important part of being inclusive, and that attracts people by itself, I would say.
Oh, well, I was actually going to start to do that because the other element around inclusion, apart from the community, was around the applications. So if we have an app that is maybe has a certain UI, maybe around visibility, but maybe about accessibility, I think you mentioned as well. I was thinking earlier we had a conversation on reputation and I guess we covered around skills on certain dimensions. So if one of the things that to access a sporting facility you needed a health rate above a certain amount, does this data and these measurements of skill become kind of exclusive? Do we start to, for people with disabilities or maybe learning disabilities who can't level up as quick, are they left behind? And what ways do we have to sort of level the playing field for people with disabilities in being able to get the most out of applications? So it's just a passing thought that if we suddenly all go on sort of like the Black Mirror episode Nosedive, and where everyone's just rating each other and everyone's getting scores, it sounds great, but I wonder, is there a flip side that's not so great, where if you just can't keep up, if you're not as good for whatever natural reasons, are you left behind? Are you left not accessing things? That's just a thought on that topic. I guess blockchain applications may come into it because they may take it to that dimension where our identity doesn't exist anymore. We're not a person with a disability, we're just a person who just doesn't level up as quick as anyone else. And is that good or bad? Like, we can't see if someone is lazy or if they just genuinely can't level up on that skill. Just a thought on that.
I think, if I get your thought, that I think at this point, inclusivity in this space, for me, is not an issue just yet, because we're still small. Not in that sense. Like, when you think about disabled people, blind people, or people who indeed, that you would say, like, they don't get the complexity. I don't get the complexity. None of us do, because it's way too complex, all of it, to really understand the vastness of it. But I think when this scales, when more and more people join, the end applications for people are going to be just as accessible as the ones you have right now. It's just going to be another app on your phone, so to say. So Swarm City is, for example, a perfect example. It's super simple. It's just like you do, there's not a lot you can do. It's just like you send something and you receive something and you ask something and you answer something. But this is also built in that way for that reason. And that is good design, that it, for the end user, it stays very easy to access. And I think in the end, all the winning applications are going to evolve in that way, and that makes them by default inclusive. But at this point, it's still, you could call it, to put it negatively, you could call it, it's an elite that's working in this. Maybe more like, the technical elite that is working in it. But that's because there needs to be focus right now. And then when this core has built out the things, then it scales, and then I think there will be a place for everyone to join, I would say.
Yeah, I agree to a certain extent, but we have to make sure that we don't look at ourselves as the people using it, and that's always a bit of a what do you mean, testing? Yeah, of course you have to test what you do, and it's what we try to do with Swarm City, like do enough tests to get feedback and to change. But most and for all, when you start designing your app, like have someone average in mind and not some of our own. Because I think that might be a mistake. People just look at themselves and think that what they know is the standard, but it's not. And if you try to, that's what we always say, like try to design for your mom. If your mom can use it, then probably a lot of people can use it. Okay, maybe a mom is, take a grandmom, right? I mean, take your grandmother. If she's able to do it, then anyone will be able to do it. And then it's like what you say, like more inclusive by design. So I think that's a very important way to start looking at building apps. Like make it simple, make it very, very, basically very simple, almost foolproof, and avoid things like having to use MetaMask to do something in your app. I see that a lot with apps that you have to have MetaMask. Yeah, well, okay, you lose like 95% of your audience by that time. If you say now you have to install MetaMask, yeah, no, okay, forget it. So try to avoid that, and yeah, I think that these are small things to keep in mind all the time when you're building an app. So in that way, will enhance the getting people on board.
I guess I don't have too much to add on that topic, but to try recircle that focus on, say, the skill attributes. That's why I'm going to sort of Swarm City in a way, that if we are leveling up on our maybe skill in, I'm trying to think what's an example. Maybe making is another example I use. So if someone's leveling up their skill in woodwork, and they can level up because they have the ability, they have the fingers to do it. But someone who does still want to build woodwork, but maybe they have a problem with their hands, arthritis, but that's their career, that's what they've done all the time. Now they're trying to grind up their level and do it. They can't do it as fast as someone who is maybe naturally more skilled, learns quicker, has all their fingers. I don't know, I'm just giving some examples here. Is there a way that we should or could, and how could that be in a decentralized way, level the playing field? To say, look, here is someone who is a human being with abilities. Unfortunately, their abilities aren't as capable off the bat as someone else's. Like, should there be some system to say, hey, this person needs a step up, this needs a boost? I don't know.
I think it's something you have. When there is a demand, someone is gonna build it at some point. So if there is this, if something is too complex, for example, for someone will build a solution that is easier to access for some other people. To give something that now came to mind was like, I do not know anything about coding, but just before this, you guys held a coding session. And Lorelei was learning, I think, crypto zombies right now. And I'm like, wow, but Lorelei cannot code, and neither can I, but maybe then I could do it too. And I'm super stupid when it comes to that stuff, you know? So I think I want to learn it, and then something like crypto zombies came up, and I don't have to like just immediately go into like deep code. So I think, yeah, it will come when the demand is there.
I think I saw a stat that like there's like one blockchain developer for every 14 blockchain development jobs. And then thinking of like creating access for people, like educational access, there's an organization called Blockchain for Social Justice. Because in thinking like we do need to start building the just talent pipeline, we need more blockchain developers to fill the need. And so we got to figure out ways to get the education to, you know, a wider audience and teach them development skills. And even if they don't go into, you know, a development job, they will potentially be end users of a product that is using blockchain. So even just teaching them the high level values from the start is also like a good way. So we have to always remember, like, you know, we're educating ourselves, we're building products, but we also have to be making sure that we're taking time out to, you know, make sure that people that are not in this space have access to the tools and resources to be able to get into it in the first place.
I wanted to come back to what you were saying before about someone with the woodworks and everything. Is it what you're saying? Is it basically like, okay, if we have marketplaces, will only the best people thrive, and will basically only a top layer of people be benefiting from it? And is there a lot of people that are like kind of not coming to that level and being left out? Is that like the worry you might have? Well, I think like if we look at the world nowadays, how it's solved, like a lot of things are like governments subsidized or stuff like that, and it's a true question, like how, if like imagine a whole ecosystem just running on blockchain applications, open marketplaces, that how we envision it, like what are we going to do then? Is that, I think like every person has something that makes him or her special, or and it's a matter of knowing your own value. But it's I think for some people it's very hard. And what we see now is that a government has taken over the role of helping out people, and that's why I think some people just don't help each other out anymore, because they have the idea like, well, government takes care of like disabled people. Oh, government takes care of people that are not very, you know, good in society, and people just gave up on helping each other one-to-one. And I hope, or I believe, that if you just imagine for a second there's no government, that people will start helping out each other again. And say, for example, you just feel for each other, right? You have something like, okay, I know you might not be the best one, but I'll help you. I'll take you on, and we'll do it together. Something like that might pop up and become more natural again, and not as much as centralized central organized as it is right now.
It's It's like we've outsourced compassion and said, oh great, we don't need to worry about it now. We pay taxes. That's where compassion is handled. But yeah, bringing it back to the community could be quite interesting. And touching to another point that I find in this space, we are all very aligned. We've all got these ideals, and we believe that society will just do the right thing at some point in time. And as much as I like to keep that optimism, I do think there are people who will be like, well, it's not my problem, and then they'll let the person fall between the cracks and not help them up. But maybe they're the rare, maybe they're the absolute minority, and they won't get the swarm city tokens on helping, on compassion. So I'll be racking up my compassion tokens. You know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not gonna be like a small minority. I think there's a lot of people that think about themselves first, and that. But I see there's a lot of people that do the compassionate thing. So there is enough people that do that and share. And if you have reputation, and that's a good thing. Once you can value that thing, like with reputation or whatever, it's something that doesn't happen right now. Not you know, like these in this world right now, money is basically built giving you reputation. So if you make a lot of money, you kind of have you're high up the ladder. But doing social good or like being good to other people, it just doesn't give you much reputation. It kind of stays in the area of you do some good, right? But if you value that more, then people will be attracted to doing that more. And if you can benefit from it, if you got a good reputation on that, and you can get stuff for free because they know like, oh, you help around a lot here in this neighborhood or whatever, and you can get everything you want for free, then it's an incentive to do that. Yeah. And we should step up on that kind of reputation, or like that currency, basically, on doing good for each other.
Just a quick point it reminded me of. In India, if someone around a family or whatever is doing well for themselves, even if they did it well genuinely, if they're that far wealthier than the people around them, they still will look at them with question. They'll wonder, how did they get so rich and everyone around them still remain poor? It's almost like they'll identify that as a problem, that someone is standing out so much wealthier than those around them, because there's almost this expectation that you're helping people around you. So if you've gone ahead so far and you've left your family behind, something's very wrong. We've got to bring that back to Western culture.
Yeah, and I think in that sense, I do believe it's when I discovered blockchain, it gave me hope. I do believe that there is another world possible. I am 100% sure that a better world than the current world is possible. And so many people, when you talk about blockchain, they're like, they see the dangers, and that's because they start from this mentality of fear. Because what if you change this, and what about the government, and how is this gonna? And it's like, but are you happy with the current system? No. Well, let's maybe try to make it a little bit better. Let's try something else. And I think that is possible when you think about this mentality of scarcity versus abundance. It's another concept we often talk about in Giveth. If you think about, I'm not gonna go all about in these these more anarchist principles, because that would probably lead us too far. But I do believe and grasp the concept of if you have a new technology that divides power in a different way, and that's definitely what's going to happen with blockchain, then you will create opportunities for people who, for the moment, do not have these opportunities. And if now all the wealth of the world is in the hands of less than 1% of the world population, imagine a future world where what you talked about, like which you have already in a family, where when there is this inequality and it feels wrong. Imagine that we live in a world that is more of a community and people have more of an abundance mindset, because there is more to go around and people can more follow what they really want to do. Then they might have some space in their life to also care for other people and to do a little bit more good in the world, because there will be time and there will be some abundance to go around. And I'm not able to express it well, but to me this is something that gives me hope, and that I do think that blockchain could possibly change. It's not for tomorrow, but it's why talking about inclusivity and so on, that I do not mind that right now it's maybe it's a bit exclusive, but it's because of a lot of people in this space also believe this. There are a lot of kindred spirits who are in this not for the money. I think almost everyone, because there are quite some people who do really not need to work if they can retire right now, but they're doing it because they have values and beliefs that they really want to bring this change to the world. So yeah.
Yeah, along that lines, an example, I know somebody, a blockchain developer, that built a product. If you're familiar with DocuSign, he built BlockUSign just for the sake of having a product that people could use that's like a secure way to sign documents. And he did, like, he could make a lot of money from it, but he's just providing it for free. And so I think, you know, I also have a lot of hope that the world will get better, because, you know, people, kindred spirits, people that have shared philosophies but different backgrounds are working on solving these problems for the sake of having a better world. And back to your point, you know, there are people that are actively compassionate. There are people that are kind of just like don't care if people fall through the cracks. But I also think we got to be cognizant that there's also folks that are trying to push people further into the cracks, which is something like even just for me this week, you know, I see news that, you know, in the U.S., you know, decision from the White House to try to erase trans people altogether. It's like, okay, that to me, for me, takes my, like, is very distracting, and is like, okay, do I now have to take time to be calling politicians, to be, you know, just doing the typical non-blockchain stuff of fighting that? Do I shift gears to say maybe there's some way blockchain can solve for that? Or do I just stay the course and say, okay, someone else is going to work on it, it sucks, and, you know, I still want to build the products that I'm working on? So there's always like a balance of values and allocating time, and like you said, abundance and scarcity, that really makes me think of that as well.
Yeah, and I think we were actually just talking in the break. I was talking to a friend of mine, and we talked about, like, she was thinking about a topic that really fascinates her, and it's non-blockchain, and she was thinking, like, maybe I should move in that direction because we all have all these life choices to make. But to me, and talking about this example of politics or wanting to change something in the default world, like we sometimes call it, now it's something you could do. But what I do believe is what is happening here in this space is changing things on a very deep, essential level that can have a ripple effect on all these things, on politics, on economics, on really all areas and all parts of society. That it feels like when you're in this, that to me, that you want to stay because you think, because I do believe that it could make an essential difference in the long run, that will have more and a bigger impact than just now indeed going into politics or saving eradicating world hunger or whatever, but really trying to change the system, because the system that we currently have is broken. So, and that's the inspiring thing.
Oh. Does it flow well into your... There you go.
You had something to say though, right?
Oh yeah, but you said that we have to wrap up.
Yeah, you can say your thought.
I just wanted to say that I think it's much more positive energy to be building something new in opposed to fighting something you don't like. So I would say to everyone, like, just like put all your energy in building something, create something you like instead of the other thing.
Yes, yes. The Black Panther Party agrees. Actually, a group I was with was mentored by some Black Panthers, and they told us, you need to always remember, spend 75% of your time building and only 25% destructing. That's the only way you can survive. Okay, yeah, we're going to talk about decentralizing justice. I would like more of a circle than we even have now, so I'm going to help that happen. activated it, but I'm not that active. So, yay! You're ready. You're early. Good job. High five. I don't really want to talk.
Yeah, commerce actually didn't happen, I don't think. Did it? No. Instead, it was an open panel on all the things. But in fact, we talked a lot about Deem's Riot bot. It was really fun. And inclusivity. Yeah. But the next talk is on Decentralize Justice. And I'm really excited to introduce Loie, who's been working in, it's a non-blockchain space. It's called restorative justice. And I think she's going to give a really interesting talk. I'm curious about the format that you wanted to do as well.
Well, I definitely want you guys to come hang out with me. Like, this is not a circle. What happens if I stand over here? Then y'all are looking at my back. Come forward. Yeah. We can make like a smaller circle. Make it more round. Yeah, yay. Okay, cool. Also, who wants to start out by just using our bodies for a minute? Will you guys stand up with me? I don't know if I have to like make this super live streamable. Like, I just wanted us to move and stretch for a minute. But that was just a warm-up. So before you guys are totally back in your brains, we're going to use our bodies again. Who here has built a machine with their body? Anybody? Ooh, this is such a fun game. Okay, so we each get to be a part of a machine, giant mechanism, and you can choose like one motion and you can add a sound to it. So maybe I'm like a hammering element and I go meow, boom, meow, boom, meow, boom. And then somebody else comes up. Kiki might join me, and then she links on. She puts her hand down here, and when I hammer on it, she does like a slide thing. So you just invent your own motion. We start one by one, and I'm gonna pick Kile. Will you be the first mechanism? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You gotta stand up. I mean, you don't have to. You could like sit too, but people are going to have to attach to you somehow. So we're all just going to think, we're all going to, okay, cool. Nice. Who wants to attach to him? Nice. Cool. Oh. Yeah, okay. Very good. Ooh, that's like a dancey one. I love that, Joshua. Ooh, we got a poker there. Oh, somebody standing up. Yeah, using her muscles. Let's see that wall sit, Lindsay. Marco, how are you going to interact? Oh, yeah, a big one. I love that. Okay. Yes. Okay. Yes. Ooh, look at this machine. Oh, and James is going to come in. Yeah, I like that grunt. Nice. This is, man, just listen to that. Would you guys say this machine is working pretty well? It's well oiled, isn't it? Yeah, it's all stretched out first. This machine is it functioning? Okay, it's a little hard. It's a little hard, but it's working. Okay, so what happens now? Just everybody keep doing what you're doing. Ooh, ow, he bumped me. Ooh, oh, Griff pushed me. Oh my God, this machine is hurting me. What happens? What happens now that this machine, there's a person in it? And the person's getting hurt, right? Person's getting hurt because they're inside of this machine. But, oh my God, the machine killed me. Dang, this machine is scary. Whoa, I gotta get out of here. Escape. Okay, great machine. Good job, you guys. Okay, so that machine was working really well, right? Like, and what happened when a person went into it? Was it still working? I think it was. It was still working, right? But the person got hurt. So we're talking about decentralizing justice. So inherent in this conversation is the prison industrial complex, right? A lot of times we say, oh, the system is broken, you know, like it's not working right, it's hurting people. But we need to recognize that the system is not broken. This is not a broken system. It's a well-oiled machine that's functioning exactly as it was designed to. And it just happens to be hurting people. Bad design. And that's what it's designed to do. Okay, so just because we now see somebody in it, we have empathy for them, does not mean that this system is failing them. No, it's working as it was meant to.
Yeah, maybe with, what did I say? Good intention, but bad execution. Yeah.
I don't know any country which has so much like cheap labor in like slavery situations than the US. And I think it's a perfectly designed system, because if you have people which are on the bottom of society, they end up in prison as cheap workers or in the army, like for the majority. And having the ghettos being so strongly influenced by the trucks does leave people no choice than go to the army or to go prison. I mean, like the 3 strike laws are perfect for doing that. Going from marijuana into like a life prison? What the fuck?
It's time for a Michel Foucault quote, who said, "Is it surprising that the cellular prison, with its regular chronologies, forced labor, its authorities of surveillance and registration, its experts in normality who continue and multiply the functions of the judge, should have become the modern instrument of penalty? Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons?" Which is what we were doing with factory.
Hi. I did the quota. What's the quota? What?
Yeah. Okay. Great contributions. Thanks, you guys. And yeah, this 3-strike law, like when that was enacted, I think 1971, when we had this whole war on drugs thing that happened in the U.S. Ever since then, prison populations have been skyrocketing. Right. It's working very well, just as it was meant to. So yeah, the U.S. is a great example of how punitive justice systems are failing at resolving conflict, right? I mean, punitive is where the focus is punishment. Yeah. So the idea of like, hey, you hurt somebody, so I'm going to hurt you to show you that hurting people is bad. What? It's weird. But yeah, the U.S. is just one example. This is true all over the world. But we have alternatives. So the reason I want to talk about this here is because blockchain, crypto, is an amazing place where, we've taken this thing that society offers us, a tool that society offers us, money, and we're decentralizing that. And now we're like, hey, there's also even like organizational structures and governance that society would offer, but now we're using blockchain to decentralize that. And another tool that society offers is justice systems, punishment, dealing with crime. I think we can decentralize that as well, and that it's important to do so if we're going to succeed at all in having, like, I think all of us people who are mathy at any core of our being, like, we love fractals, right? And knowing that if this is the overall arch, the little like tendrils of it need to also have that same curve. Do you want to talk?
You're talking about decentralizing the judicial system and punishment, right? That's equivalent to decentralizing violence. Because when it comes down to the state, it's while it has the power to do this, it's really the monopoly of violence, right? It's the only place, only system that has the power to go and physically do something to you, right? And punish you, right? That requires violence, right? To a certain extent. So when you talk about decentralized punishment, for me, it just sounds to me like you just want to be able to allow anyone to have the right to do violence. So it's kind of an oxymoron to me.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. We definitely started talking about these judicial systems, right? But prison is kind of only one piece of this. To me, what I'm focused on is decentralizing our approaches to conflict, to crime, to disputes. So it's not just like putting the power of like executing punishment on people into like anyone's hands and they can have a free-for-all. Instead, we have other systems available to us. So
maybe like one example is like if you commit a crime, then or your wallet gets slashed or something, like it doesn't have to be an eye for an eye. It could be like you did a crime, you lose all your coins or something. I don't know. Like it doesn't have to.
I like the book Chas Holloway wrote about how to decentralize government, I think it was, or something like that. And he said like his basic premise was nowadays in this society, crime pays off. I mean, it's beneficial for you if you can get away with crime, even if you get caught and you have to do a prison sentence or whatever, or you have to pay a fine. In the long run, it pays off. So if you can change it to if you do a crime and there's somehow some value you can put to what you did to society, like, okay, this is the amount of money, for example, you took from society by doing this crime. You have to pay it until the very last penny to the society. You have to pay it back in, for example, in labor or in just in money. Then then it's, yeah, for example, in labor, in that, so then committing the crime is not beneficial anymore. And that would like basically wipe off crime.
But cost is totally arbitrary. I'm sorry. I mean, like, yeah, oh, I bought this car, and I bought this car for 4K, and 2 years later, some guy smashed my car. What's the value of my car what's the value that I got lost? Is it 40K? Is it 20K? What if I had a smashed windshield before then?
I think this kind of gets to me at how, like, I think our definition of justice is a little bit wonky, and historically it's been other ways. And personally, I spent some time studying ancient languages for a while, and in ancient Hebrew, the eye for an eye thing that everyone quotes, it actually is closer to restoration than it is to punishment. It isn't, if someone takes your thing, then you have to take their thing from them. It's that if someone has something taken from them, justice is restoring that thing that was taken to them. So in the case of the window, you could say justice would be getting their window fixed, not a cost of car or cost of something. So, I mean, obviously there's a spectrum, right?
So I think that a point of centralization that we're not even looking at right now, but we're assuming as a group while we're talking here, is that somebody else outside of you is deciding what the punishment is, or is deciding what the course of action is. So it brings me to restorative justice, which I want to share about. This is where I come from. Restorative justice is an approach to crime and conflict that focuses on restoration of well-being and health in the community rather than on blame, shame, and exile, which is what punitive systems focus on. And the key piece I think you would find interesting here is that the way that a sentencing is determined is by all of the people who were influenced by the crime or the conflict. So everybody who holds a stake in it, whether they be a victim, a family member of a victim, an offender, or the offender support network, general community leaders, maybe elders, those people are all in the room together, and they create an action plan together that they all consent to move forward. And that action plan is the sentencing. So restorative justice is this system where there's not a judge. There's not even really a mediator. There's a facilitator. Like, I'm a trained restorative justice facilitator. So my job is to just call these people all together and like hold this context for them to create something they agree to. Well, so it depends on the scenario, right? Like, there's restorative justice. So there's restorative justice systems all over the world. Some of them are, like, a lot of the ones that are really a diversion away from the court system, they work under the assumption that, like, hey, you can go through this restorative justice process, and if you don't go through it, if you don't like it, or if you don't carry through with your commitments at the end of it, then you will go through the traditional justice system. So that's works really well as an incentivization for people. Yeah. Like, for example, there's in Brazil's known for being like one of the highest danger prison populations in the world. Like, the prisons there are really scary, lots of death and violence. But there's like 40 or 50 different restorative justice prisons there where people have the opportunity to go into a restorative justice prison after they've been in the regular system. And if they behaved well in that, they will never be put back in the regular system. So there's definitely different ways to hold people accountable to it. Yeah, does that kind of answer what you were coming to a challenge point on?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of, I mean, it sounds great. I mean, and a lot of, things that might sound great, even human intuition. I guess my concern is that, it's sometimes we can talk about really things that sound really great, but human intuition isn't really good at figuring out whether something is either a false positive or a false negative, and especially with things that might sound intuitively correct, they actually don't work well, right? And the only way to actually establish whether something is actually useful and actually something actually works, you have to actually go through rigorous studies and such, and it kind of sucks, unfortunately, that we can't rely on intuition alone.
And there are lots of rigorous studies. Yeah, across the board, restorative justice programs reduce rates of recidivism, which is when people re-enter the prison system or commit crimes again. Yeah, pretty much in every restorative justice program. As well as just having reduced rates of family violence. There's programs in New Mexico and Arizona that are domestic violence restorative justice programs that have way higher success rates of the children being able to stay with the families and not being abused afterwards. So being able to keep people together and not have that breaking.
So like in the example that there's a domestic violence example, like how would that restorative justice process work? Like I just so I can get my head around.
Yeah, for sure. Domestic violence is a really interesting one because no, I mean, I think it's a great one to talk about because it is a bit of a taboo in the restorative justice community. Like, I have had lots of domestic violence and sexual assault cases come to me and ask for assistance, and the organization that I worked with in Seattle refused to deal with conflicts of that nature because they're really sensitive, and there's this idea that getting someone in the same room as their offender when it's a crime of a sexual nature could actually be more harmful than healing. So a lot of people consider it to be like not good, not helpful, but people are doing this courageous work and it's working. There's programs in New York and Arizona and New Mexico, like I said. So the basic restorative justice process is someone initiates the facilitation process. They call on a facilitator, ask for help, and they start having pre-interviews. They call them pre-circles with everyone who is a stakeholder in the conflict, someone who would need to be present in order to resolve it. So they identify, who all would need to be here in order to heal this. And they have pre-circles with all of those people and inform them, hey, this is what the process is going to look like. Are you interested in going forward still? And once they get consent from everybody, they set up a meeting for the circle time. And this circle meeting involves, all of those stakeholders, people who were harmed, people who caused harm, all their support people that they need, and a facilitator, and bring them into a room and start with this question of what is it that you would like known about how you are now in relation to this thing that happened. And one person will start by sharing that, and then you ask them, by whom do you need that known? And they can name the person that they need to understand that, and then that person gets to reflect back to them. So, I might say, I need Kile to know that when he didn't email me back, I thought that he, just didn't have time for me, and that really hurt. Then Kile might say, well, what I heard is that you know, when I didn't email her back for an hour, she thought I didn't think she was an important or a cool person at all. And then I would go back and say, well, actually, I mean, that's kind of it. But I also just said that, you know, that you didn't have time for me. I didn't assume that you didn't like me. So we go back and forth till people have a state of mutual understanding. And the idea is that we're talking to each other. The facilitator comes in as little as possible because the facilitator is a point of centralization. And the more that people are talking to each other, the more they're taking responsibility for everything they come out of that room with. Yeah. And then, yeah, once there's a mutual understanding, they create an action plan. You know, we know what was broken now, so what do we need to fix?
And who gets to add to the action plan? Who decides like what the action plan is? The two people themselves with the guidance of others, or would, if I have an opinion about it, would I say, well, actually, no, you guys need to do X, Y, Z, or how does that action plan?
So basically everyone in the room, less so the facilitator, but everyone who's directly impacted. That's this core value of restorative justice, is that the people who are most directly impacted by a problem are the ones who hold the keys to being able to solve it the best. And I see that value in a lot of places, especially in blockchain too. The idea that like people who are on the ground with it, those are the ones that are going to solve it.
Okay, so the two. Let's assume for this example, there are two. The two primary stakeholders are the ones that's the center of conflict. The other stakeholders, do they share their perspective and how it affected them, and to whom, and in what order? Like, say both of you had a conflict, you shared how it affected you and what your perspective of, you know, the wrongdoing was to each other. If I'm a stakeholder and it affects me, do I follow the same pattern, and to whom do I address that to? Like, how do the other stakeholders participate? Because you mentioned a fractal, so I just...
Yeah, so if it doesn't arise organically, the facilitator will prompt each person in the circle, you know, what is it that you would like known? And usually it just starts with whoever wants to speak first. Try and let it be like as emergent as possible.
So in my head, I'm already building this smart contract. I know how to do the voting. I know how to do the putting an array of the different addresses, and I know how to put the votes. So in the example that we have some action items, I know how to add that to a list. That's fine. We can tick those items off, and we have to have, you know, maybe a multi-sig of particular items. Like 3 of the 5 people in the room have to agree that it's done, and then all the items are done. And so once the actions are sorted, how is it closed off or resolved, or what's the after that?
So there's a post circle, like there's pre-circles, yeah. So kind of the final part of the action plan is setting a date to check in. So maybe like part of the action plan is like, oh, Lorelei goes through anger management classes and, you know, completes them by 1 year from today. And then they have the post circle, and it's like, well, Lorelei didn't go to her anger management classes, so maybe we need to send her to the traditional court system.
So one obstacle I see in decentralizing justice is to kind of decentralize the how to say, sentencing mechanism. But if you don't decentralize the lawmaking system, you're making them based on like inequitous things, because like history shows us that you can act the law system on completely absurd laws, like, you know, a slave trying to escape and then you execute him based on that crime. Like, so yeah, how do we build the whole process, you know, up the chain?
I didn't understand your question.
Well, the question is, how do we build a decentralized justice system if we can't decentralize the lawmaking itself?
What about decentralizing the punishment? Stakeholders take. Oh, okay, so like if the source of the conflict is between two people, that doesn't necessarily mean that whoever the perpetrator was amongst those people are the ones that should be the only ones subject to some sort of punitive measure. How can we make sure that all stakeholders, if they participated in the conflict indirectly, have some sort of punishment to make sure that it doesn't reoccur, so that the community will, in essence, police themselves by police the group by policing themselves, because justice starts with you as the individual. You are your own judge.
Just to riff off of that, I think the law is almost a point of centralization. If we all agree that this thing is true for everyone, then we get into kind of those problems on how to even decide what that is. So my thinking for that would be everyone knows when they have been wronged, and if there's a system for conflict resolution when a person is wronged, and that is allowed to be defined by them, not by a system or not by the law or not by the whatever, then it can exist independently entirely. And as long as that gets resolved, then you don't really even need to escalate it. If there is a case, everyone lives in a country that has laws. You can't live outside of the planet, at least not yet. And but yeah, and so that as and the barrier to having that work is if someone is allowed to be really petty and, you know, start a lot of small things. So the solution to that would be have a significant stake that you have to put up to say, hey, this is a problem. And if it isn't really a problem, then you lose your stake. Is kind of can be enforced decentralized without actually having to enforce what the laws are.
It has to exceed some sort of, like, must be 10 ethers to raise a concern, and then if it's not, you get it back.
Yeah, if it is really a concern.
Yeah. And
the last three sentences. I don't. My immediate recall isn't that. But it's if someone had to put 10 ether in to say, hey, that's an absurd number, but or it maybe not an absurd number. You never know. Yeah. And if it is if it's determined to be legitimate by all of the stakeholders, then you get your money back is a way to keep things from being. You look like you have a question. No? Okay. So I'll try it again. So to start I've been wronged, and then this is all just hypothetical, it's just my thoughts. But if I've been wronged, and I know I've been wronged, and me as a person is only really the person that can know that, I can put to the system that can be decentralized that this was me being wronged. And to do that, I have to stake a certain amount saying I am putting my money where my mouth is that this is wrong. And if it turns out that that it isn't, or like the group itself that is called finds that that it isn't the case that your proposal was, then you lose your stake. And if it is, then you get your stake back.
This is what Aragon Court is trying to create, just FYI.
I think that's possible to a certain degree, but if you go one step further, if you feel wronged, then you are wronged. It's not up to other people to say, nah, you were mistaken, you weren't wronged. I think if that's what your feeling is, then it's something that should be taken into account. The thing is that the question you can ask is like, do you have to ask 10 people to come and sit in a circle for like 10 hours or something to listen to your problem that we all think like, now, well, we wouldn't make a problem out of it. But then, you know, like if someone feels wronged, the first step should be, that's what Lorelai is saying, like you should be able to at least express, like, can someone hear me? I feel wronged. And maybe if you can, for something really small that can be solved with a telephone call or something like that. But at least having the opportunity to be free to express where you feel wronged and someone hearing it. I think that can be, and you don't have to put money for that, you know, like you don't have to put a stake for that little thing.
One other thing that I thought about is, like, if I was mediating with another person, and then depending on the 8 people in the room, the actions would be different if it was a different subset of 8 people. So how do you ensure that justice is consistent?
Justice isn't consistent.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll just say, like, different people, different outcomes. Say that again. Different people, different outcomes.
That's what we want. Yeah.
Even if it's the same problem. Even if it's the same problem, same.
Even if it's the same crime, it always affects people differently, right? So the people that are in the room, the people who have been most affected by it, are going to be the best ones to create the solution.
Yeah, I was totally going to agree. Like, the only person that can say this has been resolved is the one being wronged. So that could be, for me, it could be a little bit of money. For you, it could be a good talk. For him, it could be something completely different. And so I think, yeah, every situation is different, and there's only one judge. It's the person that feels like harmed. He or she is the one to judge on that.
And in one case, you might have people who empathize with the victim, and they might be sentenced the victim to hard labor. And then in one case, they don't empathize with them and they write it off. So how do you ensure that the people in the room don't really like enforce what is truly justice? I don't know. Like, there might obviously, depending on the story, people might empathize with the victim or the perpetrator in different ways. I don't know. It's just a thought.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the only people that are allowed to decide are ones that are either directly affected or the support structure for the people that are directly affected. So that sort of mitigates that a little bit.
There's no jury of people that's like somehow from behind, you know, a vantage point where they're shielded. Let me decide your fate and you don't know my name. Like, yeah.
How are the stakeholders identified?
They're identified, it's kind of a chain of, like, the first person who initiates the process when they have a pre-circle with the facilitator. You know, I would ask that person, okay, who else needs to be present in order to resolve this? They would probably tell me a couple names. And then I interview the person who initiated the process, who said, hey, I need help. Yeah. So I have an interview with that person, and I say, who else would need to be present in order to resolve this? They give me 2 names. I go and I interview those people, and I ask who else would absolutely really need to be present in order to resolve this. We get a couple more names, and from that we have a pool of stakeholders. Yeah.
Going back to a little bit back to thank you for clarifying or helping me clarify in my mind the point of, if someone feels like they're wrong, then they are, in a sense, and having that be part of it. The place where the staking helps is with someone who's trying to pretend or to force or to manipulate the system, and like that has to be somehow accounted for too. And so I don't know a way of resolving both of those at the same time. Hey.
Have I encountered people faking the restorative justice system? No, I have not personally. Yeah. What's about all? Patent trolls. For right, yeah. I mean, I think there's just in this, it's kind of like a kumbaya process, right? And people definitely like they see it from the outside and they're like, "Wow, that was really hippie," but you know it works, and cities are using it. But when you put people in a context like that, where they're sharing their feelings and they're in a totally safe space, and they have their support network there with them, they have a facilitator who's there to make sure everything is fair and going right. It's kind of hard to like just want to keep fucking people over and like want to manipulate that. I don't know. I've never encountered it in all my years.
What would happen if the two parties where the conflict is centered around, like they were enemies? How would you like, I guess, guide them to resolving the conflict with each other? Like, for example, if they wanted to kill each other, would you just not refer that to this process? Like, would you not initiate a process for certain kinds of crimes? And what are those?
That's a great question. So there are lots of restorative justice programs that only deal with nonviolent offenses, or that only deal with youth offenders, or, you know, they have these limitations on like, oh, we won't go that far, that's too intense. But there are ones that deal with this. So I was trained by my teacher. Andrea is a woman that facilitated an amazing conflict. That's a great example, answer to your question. About 10 years ago in Seattle, in the summer, a man named John T. Williams, who's Native American and was part of a long line of Native American carvers that lived in the area, wood carvers. He was walking along downtown with his carving knife in his hand. And I can't remember if he was deaf or if he had earphones on listening to music while he was carving, but he couldn't hear. And a police officer, you know, sees a somewhat homeless-looking Native man walking along with a knife. This police officer comes up behind him and says, "Hey, drop your weapon. Drop your weapon." And he didn't, you know, John didn't hear him at all. And he just shot him in the back and killed him. And the city was in complete outrage and grief. Like, this was a beloved family of Native American carvers that have always been a part of the downtown scene. And they took away this like shining, talented person. And there was so much tension and strife, and it was definitely at this boiling point of like, okay, there's going to be retaliations, there's going to be like there's going to be more Native folks and homeless community fighting cops, there's going to be cops fighting them, more people are going to die, there were threats, there was like, it was very much a violent boiling point. And so my teacher facilitated this restorative justice process between the Native family and the Seattle Police Department. And they came to a peaceful resolution. And they decided on, you know, the healing action plan for them would be that this police officer needed to not be on the force anymore. And that they would pay for a huge totem pole to be erected. And so, as my understanding is, the Seattle Police Department commissioned the Carver family to make like the biggest totem pole that exists around Seattle. And it's this beautiful memorial to John T. Williams, right? So it healed it, right? People in that room felt like, we're okay now, we don't want to kill each other. So it's definitely available for like all levels of crime. Yeah. Good question, very good question.
how would, like in the example of, let's say he was homeless but he didn't have a family behind him, how would you, and he didn't die, how would you make sure that the process is balanced for both sides? So like if it was just one victim and the perpetrator, and how do you make sure that it's balanced if there isn't balance of it? I don't know.
Like making sure that they have enough of a support system, you mean, or
something happen, like I feel like I'm the victim and I'm in a room with all of these other people, a mediator and the police department, and I feel like I'm the victim, but then how do you make that person feel comfortable even though they don't have a support? Like, I don't know, just a train of thought.
yeah, it's definitely something as a facilitator that that's like our role, is to make sure people feel safe enough to actually put what's out there to come to a resolution. So that would definitely happen in the pre-circle meetings, like, hey, what do you need? How can I make sure? And maybe it is like, okay, if it's gonna be only you, then maybe there's only one other person from the other side of the conflict, just so you don't feel outnumbered.
So I'm having a bit of difficulty understanding the concept of distributed justice with the process described. It's a misunderstanding, I believe, because I would interpret that as the stakeholders being able to like influence what the resolution is outside, in a way that's less indirect, and their stake would be weighted somehow, and that will determine how. I'm trying to, because it sounds like two people who the conflict is centered around, they're the ones that are being influenced, and in the case that the rationality of their belief of what the resolution should be is changed through like what the shareholders say, and somehow they come to increasing levels of self-realization, and I'm finding it difficult to like visualize that in a real heated like dispute, unless I don't know. Could you just
I'm not sure I understand your question fully, but just that you're kind of having a hard time visualizing how this actual kumbaya moment arrives. Okay, you understand the kumbaya moment.
It seems like the center of the conflict, in the example that it's two people, it seems like the stakeholders are giving in their 2 cents, so to speak, and those participants, or I'm going to call them both victims, right? Or the victim and the perpetrator, they're influenced by other people's opinion of or perception of what happened, and they're peeling the onion of their basically they're benefiting from the variety of perspective of the group, and they're trying to determine, they're basically in essence judging themselves, it seems like. But I find that difficult to, in a lot of situations, I find that difficult to be like, I don't know, effective, because people are opportunistic and they don't necessarily want to be held accountable. So how can you trust the individual to judge themselves and like interact with somebody who they're in conflict with and do that simultaneously when people just don't want to be punished? Unless like shareholders had like not just stake, but influence what the resolution would be?
I kind of think about it as every system has certain assumptions that you have to make in order to kind of start it. In math, you have axioms. And in one justice system, maybe you have some axioms that exist. And in this one, I feel one that has to exist is that we all have to agree that people can know for themselves when they've been wronged. And if that is true, then all of this works. And as long as all of the participants or the community believes that axiom is there, then from there you build the rest up. Otherwise, there's really not a way to even build a system without a foundation.
From there, you build the rest up. Yeah, there's a general baseline understanding of what the wrongdoing was amongst the group, and if there's somebody who thinks it's less intense than the others, at least there can be some baseline understanding between a group of people, and then you build upon that baseline understanding. So are you saying that the shareholders will build upon that, and it would have to be clear enough for the victims? I'm calling them both victims. Like it would be clear enough for the both victims to accept, and if they can't accept like that baseline understanding, then like do you understand my sort of poorly worded question there? Maybe. Okay, that's good.
Maybe. It's that for the process you say to happen, we all have to agree that the person who is perpetrated is able to know for themselves what is wronged. And then a second axiom would be that two people can agree that something that can come to a conclusion about what the thing that was wronged was. And as long as someone or everyone believes that's true, then the rest of that process that you described can happen. In the case that it's not true, then it can't, and you have to kind of choose to believe that in the beginning, I feel, maybe.
I'm so sorry. Go.
So I always think about these in terms of real world examples, and I'm only very new to this, and this is something that 15 minutes, my head is just spinning. So I live in a share house, my friends are DJs, and we've got neighbors who hate us. So we don't think what we're doing is wrong. We like to play music and have parties on Fridays, and they hate us, and they decide to start a mediation court because they can't deal with our noise anymore. And so they call a court, and why would I go to court? Like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything wrong. I should be able to listen to music in my own house. Why would I go to court with my neighbor? If anything, I'll put the music louder. So why would the perpetrator participate in this? Why would the perpetrator participate in this? Yeah, why would I do it?
So this is where it is kind of convenient that we're transitioning between systems, and that we all most of us live in countries where there still is some like big bad scary system that is like the ultimate consequence. And I mean, I think a lot of people, if they really truly don't see any personal value in communicating with that person who just wants to communicate with them, then they often do see a value in that there are like larger consequences if they don't choose this facilitation option. Yeah. You know, so it's like you might be like, well, I want to keep throwing my parties, like roommates, we shouldn't do this. And your roommates might be like, well, but dude, like what if they talk to our landlord, like if we don't do this, you know, we'd be better off with this system. Yeah.
So it's like a pre-justice before like the established, like the established is that the police come to my house and they give us a noise abatement order. But to avoid that, instead of my neighbor giving, hey, look, I really want you to stop the music, come to this mediation court. Look, I just think we need to talk this out. And then we come to a resolution about suitable times and when and when I can't. Like Tuesday, 6 o'clock in the morning is not a, like, because we got kids or whatever it might be. So before it gets to the police stage or calling my landlord, they've given me the option, hey, look, I'm sick and tired of your stuff. Do this pre-justice workshop before I take it to the police or to your landlord. And that's kind of cool, because then I can get to talk to my landlord, and because at the moment my landlord just calls the cops straight away every time. Right, so at least I would have this pre-step that would benefit both, and it's more sustainable.
Okay. What about bias and like notable cultural differences, like at the level of like value system cultural differences? Like there may be a situation in which somebody may think, yeah, it's okay for me to beat my wife, and somebody else might think that's terrible. And well, it's in this book that I read. Well, fuck. I'm sorry. F you, because that's terrible. Like, well, like, how? Okay, so that's an extreme example, right? To just highlight. Oh no, sorry. Okay, yeah, I just use that extreme example just to like make it easy to understand. But yeah, can you describe that situation or give an example of a situation like that you've experienced?
Wait, sorry, a situation like what?
Okay. Yeah, like that.
Okay. I just want to honor that idea that's brought forward, because it's really big and I don't have an answer for it. Like, it's super real. Cultural value differences are really valid, and like, just because I think that like, grammar is great or whatever doesn't mean that that's actually okay for me to like put that on somebody who's speaking within my organization, because maybe they're from a different culture and they don't have English as their first language, and that is super uppity and colonialist of me to to enforce that. So I don't know. I think those things are everywhere, where like there's cultural value differences, and I don't know how. There's no ledger, right, to say like whose culture is right. And I think the best hope that we have is of like coming together and looking at each other face to face and going, hey, this is what I need and why. This is what I need and why.
In the example where you have stakeholders from both sides, they would each side would have their represent. So you might, is there a room for an objective third party? Like, I understand the media, but like I'm thinking of like a jury where it's an unbiased jury where there's 12 people who don't have any alliances with either side. Is that, but you, because you said specifically that only the people who need to be in that room need to be in that room. And is that a reason for that?
Well, if they decided that they wanted a jury, and I think some people probably would. Yeah, that could be part of their action plan. Hey, we're going to have this next step of the process that includes totally external evaluators. We have 5 minutes, and I want to get a little just closing round from everybody. And before I do that, I just want to share one last little story to bring it towards decentralization about this school that I worked with in Oakland called Ralph J. Bunch Continuation School. Continuation school is like when you've already been to juvie, or you've already been kicked out of every school you've been in and you have big problems, you get sent to this place. and there's tons of crime and violence at school, lots of kids skipping, and you know, in any given year, 86% of the students are suspended or expelled. Like, it's pretty bad. There's lots of fights to the point of people having to get kicked out of school. And they started a restorative justice program there, like probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And I worked with them about 4 or 5 years ago. And so when this man, Eric Butler, who leads the program there, he came in and he started this restorative justice program, where he got a room that became the RJ room, and they would have a circle of chairs there, and anytime there was a conflict, the kids were encouraged to go, you know, go talk to Eric, and go, you know, have a restorative justice circle. And so they did this for the first year, and it worked out. It took a lot more convincing of the teachers and parents than it did of the kids. The kids took onto it really well. And he told me that by the second year of him coming back, he would come to school, you know, a little late. You know, he's slacking on his job. It's year number 2. There'd be kids having circles in the hallways on their own. They didn't need him as a facilitator. And then they started to just say, well, let's open up the room. You know, we don't need to have a key to this room. And so kids would all the time just take themselves in. They knew the restorative justice process. And getting trained as a facilitator in this is rigorous. Like, I went through lots of training, and it's hard to learn the system. But they learned it by being a part of it, and they started taking it on themselves. And by the time it had been 3 years, you know, it was like he was barely needed anymore. He would sit in sometimes. And in the first year of having this program, they went from 86% rate of suspensions and expulsions to 0. Like, they just don't expel kids anymore. Kids stay in school. They handle their own shit. And I think it's a great reminder of how, like, when we're building any tools as people that bring forth decentralization, the idea is to work yourself out of a job and make that, if that system is truly valid for the people, they will take it on themselves. And that's a way to test if your idea or your system really works, or if it's valuable to people. They'll take it on themselves. Yeah. And I would love to hear, is it okay to get people's last thoughts? No? Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, a round of applause. That was amazing. Great discussion. So thank you guys for coming. We have one last talk. I just want to say that this last talk is going to be done. It's the last talk of the conference, and actually they might even try to come in and start taking shit down around us, because but we're not going to stop. This is unstoppable shit, and so we're gonna keep going with it. So if all of a sudden someone comes in and says, "Hey, I need those chairs," we can give them the chairs, right? And we can just stand up and continue the adventure. So yeah, and but we do need to rearrange this because we have a little bit of a different format. So we're going back to the panel game, musical chairs. It'll be really fun. Yeah, we're going presentation style. Five chairs up here, which we have right now, so that's good. Xavi, you get to sit up there.
Before I forget,
yeah.
And router missing, which should be around. Do you have any idea where?
I mean, I can go and hunt it down before while we start this thing.
Okay. I don't want to forget this.
Yeah. And I.
Yeah, I send you by email.
Okay.
Details.
Okay.
By
Perfect.
mail. You have in duplicate.
Yeah. Okay.
No problem.
Email? Because I never saw the email.
Okay. Maybe I send it to a wrong address.
Okay.
But you have in
Signal. Okay. It might delete though. So just like hopefully, are you coming to Jump 3000? Oh, the other thing that I should mention is we have this really fun event that we're going to do right now. So after this talk, and actually some people during this talk are going to go to this place called Jump 3000. It's a trampoline like party. So you can do like jump off trampolines and do backflips into foam pits and it's a parkour gym. They have all sorts of like obstacle course stuff. It'll be really fun. So after this talk or during this talk, if you're not staying for the talk, definitely head to Jump 3000. It's €9 and they're closing the place. The place closes at 7, but they're keeping it open just for us. So it should just be Crypto Crew from 7 to 9:30.
Mostly just us. It empties out around 7. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Yes, I did. Cool. So if anyone wants to come talk about anonymous voting, join in. We're doing this awesome panel thing. If you haven't seen it, we've been doing it most of the conference. Anyone is welcome to sit up here and be part of the conversation. Yeah. So there'll always be 4 people sitting in 5 chairs. So if someone else comes up, one of the 4 people needs to go back. And but they can of course come back, right? So it's just for fun. And if sometimes there's 3 people or sometimes there's 5 people in the chairs, it's okay. But like, you know, not forever. So if there's 3 people up here, someone needs to jump in, right? Otherwise it's awkward. Okay. So yeah, let's get this party started.
Okay, I don't really know where to start, but I guess I'll start with saying that anonymous voting is just like a merging of a lot of other things, right? Like it's social, it's identity, it's anonymous, it doesn't live on its own, so it's a lot of a conversion of a lot of stuff. And we also have very specific ideas of where that comes from. Like we have like a past of how voting works, and now we have completely different tools on how voting can work. So I don't know, I'll just start with that, see if anyone has any take on that.
Can you just go over maybe some more of the history of what you're like, more of that piece? Yeah, or just like people and
I'm thinking about. So, in my case, I am from Catalonia, and 1 year ago there was a kind of referendum there, which was blocked by the police and by the state. There was a war in the internet, and then at that point I realized that having a voting system based on blockchain or some kind of distributed peer-to-peer system, it's a need to avoid this kind of censorship. So I started to think how to implement this stuff. I have like speak with many people and check many projects and so on, but as far as I know, there is nothing useful yet nowadays. So yeah, my idea of this panel was to try to invite people to share some ideas regarding this topic. Yeah, and talking about not making a simple doodle anonymous, but a whole system for a whole country with millions of people, accessible to everybody. How can we achieve this topic? That's my question to everyone here.
My story is similar. Working on the blockchain space, you realize how how things can change, right? And now you find yourself in the middle of this cyber war, and you have to do something. And so that's how eventually we end up together, and we look for solutions that can be done now, right? Like the theory is all very nice, but how many of these, like, who uses Bitcoin, right? Like if no one's using Bitcoin, how are we gonna use like a decentralized voting scheme? So that's why, like, for the last year, we just putting all energy, like trying to figure out mechanisms that can accomplish that as soon as possible. So our focus always been on trying to accelerate that, right? We know that we probably are not like the most skilled developers. We need like a huge range of skills to build that, but maybe we can like be used as like we can put all the pieces together to like make that happen. So we are like on this constant conversation on like just yesterday we on the ZK Snark stock and then the ZK Stark stock, right? And like just with an hour of difference, like our mind was like blown away, like because like we were like we're jumping gaps in technology. So we want to make that fast, and we need to like decide on what technologies to use and how this can be done, right? So we're like we just want to hear everything that exists. We want to hear ideas. We want to hear like technologies. So that's what I'd like to have that.
Awesome. So I'm from Australia, and I work at a co-working space, and the person who sits right beside me is a gentleman named Max K from Secure Vote. He runs a political party in Australia called Flux, and Flux is a beautiful political party with 7,000 members, and if one person gets into the House of Representatives or the Senate, then the 7,000 members vote with issue-based direct democracy. So, and they accumulate points and they get to vote, and the elected official is a proxy for the members. And so they've got some beautiful technology in terms of the like the secret ballot. So in terms that I need to be able to confirm that this address has voted, but I need to I need to delineate my vote so people can't coerce me. So in regimes like Russia or dictatorships where they say, well, I can reverse engineer who the votes were, and there is consequences for not voting in particular parties. So there needs to be the delineation between I have voted and abstracted away from what did I vote. And so that secret ballot was traditionally solved with a paper. So the fact that I can go into a booth, and that is how I delineate the fact that I've checked my name off the roll and I put my vote in.
And that sounds like the ideal candidate for a Stark, or as you say, Snark or Stark, because you could prove that someone had voted without revealing what they have voted and still have the results somewhere. And so that's totally possible. I'm wondering what level of of anonymous the voting needs to be, like, because you have to prove that the stakeholder is someone who is able to vote in the situation, I guess. Like if you were in a country, you have to actually be a member of the country, not a member of something.
So I think that brings us to like probably the hardest problem we have, which is like who can vote. Like making it anonymously, it is a hard problem, but as you said, like there is technologies for that. But how do you make sure that everyone that can vote can actually vote and no one else in a context where you are under constant like you're in a cyber war, like they won't allow you to do that. How do you create this census? How do you make people?
So there's a few ways. One of the ways is by creating a non-transferable token. So the same way you would go to Medicare or any of the drivers or in whatever country you are, you provide your ID and they transfer you a non-transferable token.
What happens when they don't allow you to have access to this kind of, like, you cannot just go to authority because that's forbidden?
So how do you... But we have to agree that this voting is legitimate, right?
I guess what I'm trying to say is, like, under the circumstances that we were, like, in the case of Spain, like, they did not allow. They were forbidding voting, right? So you need now a mechanism to like make all the citizens to have like an identifier that allow them to vote. How do you do that when they're under like constant like attack, right? Like we're talking about creating decentralized identities, but we're talking about making decentralized identities within like a nation state. So that's what the things start getting a little complicated, because at least from my perspective, there is like conflict or like ideologies, like these two things don't match together.
Yeah, maybe I can explain a bit our first implementation of a voting system. It was mainly an Ethereum network to manage the identity. So there were like individuals or organizations, and organizations can sign claims to individuals. So, for instance, if I'm, I don't know, a cooperative, I can sign a claim saying you are a member of my cooperative, and you have the right to vote, or you are over 18 years old, or something like that. So your identity is a set of claims by the organizations. Then this organization can create an election and say only this, for participating on this election you need to have these claims. So you have to be over 18, blah, 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 blah. Then once the organization click the button for creating a new election, there were a set of servers somewhere that creates a Zcash temporary blockchain, which was only for the election. And it gave one token to each voter. And then the people just make a Zcash transaction to a special ballot address with the content of the vote. And that worked. But there are some problems if you want to apply it to a whole society with real people and so on. The first problem is that ZK snarks are very expensive, CPU intensive. So and there is not or there was not a JavaScript or a web-based implementation. So you need a real computer with some Linux kernel or Windows stuff and a desktop application for creating this ZK snark proof and so on. That was the first problem. Another problem is that the system is not very resilient because you need these servers, these special servers which create this temporary blockchain for voting. So if these servers are attacked, then the election is just not possible. Yeah. So recently we have changed to another, well, we are like redesigning everything because now there is this JavaScript implementation for ZK snarks from IDEN 3 from a company which is open source, and it makes possible to vote using a phone or a tablet, something like this. But we are still like thinking how to. I mean, is it possible to use a system like that with 10 million people in a one-day election? Is it the blockchain technology prepared for this kind of stuff? I'm not sure of that.
So one of the things as a government, it costs money to throw an election. So every time I throw an election, there's a really important price point. It's a cost per voter, and generally in Australia, it's between $10 to $15. So 21 million people would cost us about $150 million per referendum or vote. And so for these systems to be adopted by a nation state, whether or not it's legitimate or not is another story, they have to be an order of magnitude cheaper. So in my mind, it would have to be the cost of a gas transaction less than 30,000, like it has to be less than $1 or $2, and then the nation state will pay that because it is cheaper than hosting a traditional election, which costs on average $10 to $15. So I think the technology is beautiful and it has a lot of potential for legitimate nation state that this actually saves a lot of money. The trick is to do it securely, trusted, and all the rest. Yeah, that's my train of thought.
Come in.
Alright, so it's an open question for you guys. I just jumped in because I'm not sure what stage of the conversation you are. So like I've seen a few systems, like a few projects that try to tackle that problem. One I can think of on top of my head is called Agora. They did run an election in, I think, Sierra Leone, and anyway, I'm sure there's several already like trying to solve that election voting issue. Have you guys seen anything interesting, that exciting, that you think could be used like soon, like let's say in the next 2 to 3 years, or it's just
I don't know exactly Agora, but
I think you refer to Bit Agora, maybe. Agora. Then I don't know this.
We did other research, right? Like that's not something that we want to build because we like building this stuff. Like we want to build because we need it, right? So if there is a technology out there that we can use, we will love to use it. I don't remember that we did like our research. Okay, but our background, like what we saw, is like there is nothing really open source that can like fully verifiable and fully decentralized. That's something we need, and like if that exists, like we want to know about it for sure.
I mean, it's not public yet, so I don't know. Some basic ideas about what is it about? Well, I mean, the one that I'm building is for like the Aragon project. Yeah. So they kind of need on-chain voting because it's like governance on-chain and DAOs on-chain, right? So I mean, I'm just using my scheme is just really aggregate bilinear signatures and then one-time MPC setup to to add privacy to bilinear signatures, right? I mean, I chose that because it doesn't require trusted setup. It doesn't require ZK snarks, which have, I mean, like if you're like deep into cryptography, some, exotic assumptions. But I mean, like, like not having to do one-off blockchain every time, not having to trust an external trusted setup, which may, if that's ever broken, rerunning that ceremony is a pain in the ass, right? And the one-time MPC makes sure that no one ever has toxic waste, right? So that's kind of like my scheme that I'm working on. I think it's easy to do it in like the blockchain context if you're just voting on blockchains. I think if you want to do it for like state elections, I think like a lot of the rest of the world needs to catch up, right? I mean, you can't. I think just saying that we're gonna put elections on, behind ZK snarks doesn't really address, like for example in Catalonia, like if the government really doesn't want a certain thing to happen, like whether there's a like a provable trail that the populace wants, it isn't going to make a difference in my opinion. Like you have to sort of disintermediate the government itself, the power of the government first, because otherwise, like they generally know the people's opinion. They don't care.
Well, first you need a tool, right? Like once you have the tool, then I think we can start with like politics, right? Like that doesn't need to be run by a government. Like just needs to be run with an authority that has enough respect of the civil society, maybe. So you have a lot of margin there.
Yeah, what can I say? Yeah, I mean, I don't know how the system you are designing works, but to make an election on-chain and in real time for a real country with 20 million people, I don't know any blockchain technology that can support this. I mean, you need to do it maybe off-chain. Yeah, you don't need a blockchain. That's true. So yeah, then it's off-chain. It's not on-chain.
Just for the closing statement. I mean, you can do the vast majority of the process off-chain, and then just like provide the final aggregate on-chain to show that like this. You can do it without ZK snark as well. Just to say, hey, look, something took place. Here's X people voted for this, Y people voted for that, and here's like a a final like a aggregate proof that happened. I mean, the 20 million people don't need to all register on the blockchain. That would be crazy. Yeah.
So I just double checked. So the Australian startup that I was talking about did 1.5 billion votes within 24 hours for $550,000. So the Australian government gave them a grant, and they hammered the network for 24 hours and were able to do 1.5 billion votes on chain. It was the Bitcoin network. It's called secure.vote, and they use a Copperfield algorithm. Anonymous votes. It's secret, on-chain, decentralized. And what they did is they batched them in groups of 100, and they had like batch IDs, and then you can say that I voted in a batch, and you can. They did it in batches, and they hammered the network, and they did 1.5 billion votes in 24 hours.
That's interesting. Is it the source somewhere?
Yeah, it's secure.vote. I'm just on my phone, but.
Okay, I will check.
I just remembered another project that I looked into. So it's called consensus.ai, and it's like the angle I think that was interesting is that the one of the co-founders, like the technical co-founders, is a guy who was heavily involved in e-residency in Estonia. So I don't know if you know what's happening in Estonia. They're like heavily they're like basically the sort of first electronic state. You can basically buy a house remotely. They have electronic signatures and all that business. So like they are like probably the first state in Europe that could adopt that sort of solution, because you say, yeah, we need a solution before finding the political decision to actually vote. But I think you need to find who is the real first adopters, the first users that actually will use the solution. I think it's really important. So I think that's probably a good angle to look into that project. I know that they had the plan was to first build a system that was usable for a small group of people, for a small organization, and then sort of scale up from there. I don't know if it's open source. This is something I looked back some months ago. But yeah, that's something another project to look into. Yeah.
Okay, just arrived, so I might have missed some of the earlier conversations. But I think one of my personal big questions around online voting and anonymous voting is it a problem where the technical part is have we solved the problem? Because I heard lots of very smart people and cryptographers basically say it's a really, really hard thing to get right, because there's always very subtle and complex schemes around coercion and bribing. To mind comes the example of dark DAOs that Phil Dyer and the Cornell University introduced. Kind of using some super complex stuff on-chain with DAOs, zero-knowledge proofs, to basically do a very efficient bribing and trying to prove that all type of voting on-chain, even aggregating on-chain, just couldn't work without this also being able to work. So is that relevant? Is that impossible in the real world? Just purely theory? Is that solved?
I think a lot of these zero knowledge technologies take a lot of the weight on that. At the same time, the blockchain itself, add this resiliency and it adds a little layer of anonymity as well. At the end, this is an open source project. I think most of the controversy I've been around digital voting, it's been with terminals and systems that were centralized, right? And they were using security by obfuscation, stuff like that. We're talking about a completely different system. We're talking about every single part of the system is fully verifiable, right? So
I think he was bringing up the fact that if you can vote from home and with a digital signature, right, whatever, if it's zero knowledge or not, then you can provide proof to a third party that you voted for that and get automatic payouts, right? So it's much easier to do mass by voting.
Yeah, that's a problem intrinsic of any digital system, right? And also an analog. There's buses of old people just driven to the voting station, and they give them the papers so they can vote. That's a social problem. I think, yeah.
The coercion part. There's also very subtle coercion schemes that are made possible with these types of zero knowledge proofs, and especially online voting, where it's much easier to prove that you did something or not. To analyze, for example, if you can somehow like get all the votes, and you can only compute that. You don't have the individual votes. But then if you can compute the same thing without like one person and have the result, you can basically deduce what that person voted. And that's a very basic. It goes like much more complex details, which I don't know about. But I know it's often like a critique that is like brought up of these anonymous voting schemes.
I'm not defending these systems are perfect, like right, like we are at the edge of like a bunch of technologies, all of them at the edge. That's like a exploration, right? Like we're trying to push here to get as much we can like right now.
I'm really excited about the time delay functions, verifiable delay functions at hopefully solving some of those problems, at least with timing involved. A question I've had just sitting down there is, in the case of Catalonia, like they didn't let you vote, right? Well, they didn't allow it. So then verifying that you are a member of Catalonia from the government that is there becomes impossible. So I was wondering at technology if there's ways of adding in another validating source that is not the system itself, but it could still validate that these are the people who are able to vote that isn't from that place.
Like if you have decentralized identities and you can verify the claims of of all these identities, then it doesn't matter who said that, right? All you need to do is like is the authority that is providing these claims trustworthy, right? And at the end, what you need is just to get numbers of like what this community wants, right? And maybe the ex authority that created these elections was not trustworthy, but maybe another one is, or is enough trustworthy, right? All you're trying to do is to prove that you have a majority there, right? As an overall, right? That you can like get precise. At the stage where in Catalonia was just trying to make something very obvious, quantifiable at this last year. So if we can get there, like that's like a huge goal already, right? Then we can get try to get much better from there. But like,
I think there's also possibly a prior step economic solution in Switzerland, for example. Unlike in many other countries, even if you're employed like a salaried employee, you don't pay tax like at source. You just get your paycheck, and then you have to write the government a check at the end of the year, like lump sum for the tax, right? And so it's this. You get, at the end of the year, every year you look at this check you got the government. They're like, is the government really serving my needs for this amount of money that I give them every year? And I think, like in the Catalonia case and whatnot, you could say, fine, if the majority votes in an area votes that they want to secede or they no longer agree with the current government, they don't get the protections, but the tax money does not go to the government anymore, right? I think if you structured the country in that way, the people would have a lot more power, because then suddenly this hundreds of millions is free to do what you want with to secede, and you're not this powerless. It's not like, oh, here's the money. Oh, now please act the way we like. You don't give like when I go to the shop and I buy a banana and I already given them the money. They're like, I don't know. How about an orange? It's like, no, give me the banana, give me the money back.
Yeah, that's what in the beginning I was saying, that there is a conflict here because we're proposing a decentralized scheme which is antagonist to the state, right? And that like in parallel. And responding to your question previously, like you're saying, like, is that a technological problem? I think no.
I was just wondering if the technical problems were solved. It's obviously like much more than that. Yeah. It was just this aspect.
Okay, but like the main aspect, the hard problem is a social problem. It's like how do you make people people could decide not pay taxes, right? That's a huge statement. That changed things. They don't, right? They're like attached to this system. They cannot do that. At the same time, unless you have like I've seen a lot of conversations on governance and how like the signaling is like one of the main issues, right? How you make a decision if you don't have like a signal, like how like a foundation, like a government can make decisions. And voting is nothing but a signaling mechanism, right? And right now the problem is like like they have the option to, you know, disable the signaling mechanisms. So we're doing here like just putting in place like a signal mechanism that they cannot like block, right? And you know, it may be very bare bones, but it may be enough for people to say, okay, yeah, like now it's clear, and now we can like take like hardcore approaches. But because we have seen, like we have numbers that these things must change, right? And we're talking like very like kind of big numbers, like we're talking about states, but probably like this is gonna start be used like in like small like communities or like small entities, and it's gonna scale up later, right?
Actually, this idea of, you know, for the taxes, like you decide if you want to pay the tax and receive something. It's kind of like voting with your taxes or your money. Actually, it's kind of like you choose towards what should they go, or like if you want to like frame it to crypto ways, like staking towards like to receive something, just you put it towards that. That like could that be developed like further into a scheme where you basically vote with what you want to receive, and especially in the context of like some have thought about that maybe the best way to have good governance is to have more competition in the market for governance. Couldn't that be like another type of voting to be, if you want to be very general?
I love everything you're saying there. That's actually pretty much what I'm trying to do with Giveth. You know, Giveth is all about decentralizing nonprofits, and the largest nonprofits in the world are the Chinese government, India, you know, the United States, and that's exactly how the system, the core root of the system is working, where it's like, if you, let's say that there was just just keep things simple, no political things here. Let's just say there's like a flat tax of 10%. You have a forced donation, you could say, but you actually have authority over that donation, and you are connected with a delegate. So it's kind of a liquid democracy meets fund management style, right? Where your delegate gets to decide where you go, but you can veto, right? And then you get to actually see exactly where your money goes, right? There's full traceability and accountability through the system. And let's say there's a failed project, you know, but they had $500,000 in the bank. That money would actually go back up a level after the project failed, whatever money hasn't been spent, and then it could be continue to filter through the system, and maybe you'd get access to those funds for vetoing at that point, right? And when you start throwing in this really nice simple logic, like with blockchain, it makes it just really easy that you could even say, hey, maybe I want like 80% of my money to go towards education. I want 10% to go towards military, and 5% to go towards, I don't know, roads, and another 5% for whatever, right? Slush fund. And then everyone could actually see what the percentage is for all the funds that are being delegated, right? And it's a signal. It's not necessarily guaranteed to be that way, because you could veto, you could pull back your funds, and then you could have someone could see, holy shit, only 10% is going towards the military. That's not enough, you know? Like, Spain is coming, man. We gotta get ready. And then you up that. You're like, I'm going 100%. I'm going all in military, man. Right? I probably wouldn't, but this is like an option.
And I think on the competition thing, most countries' governments are extremely like not competitive, and they don't allow like any kind of actual solution seeking to problems. Again, like Switzerland is a good like counterexample, because in Switzerland, if you as a politician or a policymaker are able to cut the cost of government service, like for example, hey, you know, I cut the cost in half for road repair, but we still repair the same amount of roads. The politician takes half of the cost they saved, and they pocket it, right? And Switzerland is so damn efficient because of this. It's the only country in the G8 or in the Eurozone whose debt has gone down since the last 20 years, every year, right, roughly. Whereas like everyone else goes up. Why? Because when they make sure to run out of budget every year, so they get more budget next year, right? It's a bad incentives. But if you actually align the incentives well, you can actually get competent governors.
I absolutely love both of those ideas. Griff, how do we get there for the idea of governments with deciding the budget and having visibility? Is that like charter cities, experimentation zones, that other stuff?
I mean, what are governments doing? No, like seriously, what do they do? They're just another nonprofit, you know? And there are lots of nonprofits out there. So if we start building nonprofits that perform functions that the governments are supposed to provide, and we give people the option to opt in to these systems, then what do we need these guys for, right? Like, we don't need these fuckers. They just disappear. This is like, I gave this talk actually in Switzerland a little bit ago that like, I really believe we're building an evolution. It's not a revolution. A revolution like that's happening in Catalonia right now. Like, that's fucking awesome. I'm all in, okay? But that's not necessarily the blockchain style. At least not the piece I see. I see it as an evolution. I see it as an evolution in human organization. And when systems actually evolve to the point where they're just 10 times better than the other options, it'll just naturally occur that the powers that be won't be the same powers that be anymore, you know? This is my dream, at least.
So in 2016 in Australia, we had a Flux party. You know what these guys are? Yeah. So I voted for them, and they're awesome, and they do this whole issue-based direct democracy. And so they've got about 7,500 members, and the idea is that if one person gets into either the Senate or to the House of Representatives, then for every issue you can accumulate points up to 5 tokens. So for issues that matter for you, you can allocate all 5 of your points, or if there's things that you can accumulate, you don't vote for. So the idea is that if you get one person into Parliament, then we can slowly cannibalize that system. So if we get 3 people, then it's a heavier weighted vote in that system. So it's a really interesting way to take over that system using its own mechanism. And so another interesting point that they do that's different is that I could delegate my votes to someone who has a better understanding of, so I could delegate my financial decisions to my accountant, or if I've got an uncle who's in the farm, I can give my agricultural votes.
That's representative democracy, right? It's not working well in the States.
No, it's different.
Yeah, so I can delegate my issues depending on different things. So I can vote for same-sex marriage and put 5 votes to that, but then something related to agriculture, I don't really have an opinion, but or my science delegate might accumulate 100 people, and they make a more informed decision regarding science and technology or agriculture or treasury and finance.
Yeah, so it's a liquid democracy, and it's a system where you have the ability to take back your votes at any moment. So it is like a representative democracy, except the term limits are indefinite, and the elections are every second. So it's like it's similar but different, and you can elect yourself. And so it's like this hybrid between representative democracy and direct democracy. And really quick, I just want to say that what Flux Party is doing is so cool, because they're like, listen, we're just going to elect people that will do whatever their phone says. And so it's like it's a way to hack the system. Yeah, your representative is still you, right? You elect this guy. It's like you're electing your phone or his phone, and he'll just be like the gateway to hack the political system. I love it.
Though I do think like having thought about building stuff in the blockchain space for a long time, one very important thing that the government do provide is common law framework. Like when you have to think in an environment without common law framework where there's no one to go after, it's like everything becomes so much harder. So, and I think that's actually one thing that's like that really needs to be centralized. I wouldn't really be comfortable giving the power to prosecute or jail people to like arbitrary groups with different interests, right? Like, you know, like this, oh, you know, in this one canton or whatever area of like 1,000 people, they decided that wearing the color yellow is illegal. So if I drive through it, I get arrested. If my car is yellow or whatever, you know, I think that's one thing that sort of needs to stay consistent, and that's one thing that governments do actually provide a good value for.
But governments are just made of people, right? So I mean, whether they're using a legal structure that is, you know, hundreds of years old and hasn't really anticipated the use of the internet or trains for that matter. Yeah, I mean, we're talking, how long would it take to send a letter back when this shit was made? You still just have people. For me, you can call it a government, you can call it a blockchain, you can call it whatever, but it's a structure of human organization, and I think it's time that we see some awesome experiments, right? I don't think that unless there's some kind of major issue that we should just be overthrowing governments. That's pretty crazy. But I do think we should be running some real experiments and start upgrading this very old, out-of-date system, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, so like there was like a lot of interesting points. So like you mentioned, so there's like the government services provided according to your territory, like laws, but then you have like some services, I think, that are some sort of like purely practical and kind of irrelevant to your location. So like what I come to is like you already have people who don't really belong to any territory, who live regardless of time of the year at different locations. Don't feel like they belong to any sort of country. And so like these people have the problem of finding basically what government suits them, what sort of system. So that's, I never thought of like your point of view about like government is just a charity, or not a charity, a non-profit, sorry. I think that was really good insight. I never thought of it like that. And this, in that sense, this really resonates with those people who basically they look for a good non-profit that has a sort of framework that works for them or that they like. And so then the problem is that how do you link that to actual locations? Because you sort of have to, like, this problem is that then you have people who 1 month live in one place, 1 month in another, but they're registered in somewhere else because somehow it's more convenient, and then it's not long term. It cannot work long term because the country where they're at, they're using the services, right? So how can that be solved? You know, that's really I think the problem.
Well, I think yes, the governments are non-profits, but they also have the monopoly of the violence, and that makes it a very special kind of non-profits, and that make it like, you know, you will never have like this kind of location agnostic government that can fulfill your needs, right? Like understanding governance as someone that have the monopoly of violence, because that's purely location-based thing. But I wanted, like, we kind of went away from voting and went to governance, and I think that's logical because, you know, yeah, like somehow I believe that voting it's not a good tool. Like it's the best tool we have in the system we have right now. So when we're building a voting system, what we're trying to do here, at least my approach here is like, I don't think that's like the ultimate system, but it's like a statement. Like what we're trying to do here is like statement saying that, hey, civil society can decide by themselves. Hey, we don't need anyone that say, hey, you can vote or you cannot. Like we're doing here, like it's an idea that we want to share, right? And
having the option of like anyone coming, saying I want to create an election and say choose who can vote, and say like full Catalonia, and then suddenly everyone can vote. Like that's a huge statement, right? And for me, that's the magical point here. That's where we want to go. Like I don't think voting's like at least the classical voting scheme is any good. Like I think it's awful thing.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more, but at the same time, we got to remember, like, general design theory, if we want to get to a place where we have, like, this awesome, who knows, curation market for laws or some crazy, like, you know, governance theory, we got to go one step at a time. You can't just have a whole populace and onboard them to this like mind-blowingly awesome application, expect them to use it, because they won't. Like if Facebook adds a feature, they add one feature and they change it one step at a time. So we need anonymous voting because that's what we have now. We need to model it. It needs to be the exact same. People need to have voter registration cards. They need to be able to...
It needs to be mobile friendly. I need to be able to do it from home, and it should just be non-trivial. Like it should.
Yeah, we should give those options, but at the same time, you know, our grandmas are not gonna just dive into their phone and be like, "Oh, this is cool. I'm gonna." No, there needs to be a voter card. They need to go to the same school that they go to vote. They need otherwise adoption of that system. Like if we're talking, let's implement this in the next decade. It needs to start out add some cool optional features, but it needs to be designed. In my opinion, it needs to be designed the exact same as it is now, and for better or worse. And then it can start to evolve, and people can start experimenting. But yeah,
it's a perfect example because, like, if I'm lazy, if the government sends me an email saying if I go to the Department of Motor Vehicles and scan my QR code and I can vote, I would love to do that because then I'm lazy, I can do it at home. But the idea that we vote every 3.5 years for this two-party system, that this one elected party represents all of my values and morals, and you know they might agree with 70% of my morals, but 30%, you know, they go against something completely wrong, and I go for the other party for like. So the whole notion that I vote once for every 3 years is flawed. I definitely think that mobile technology with blockchain and anonymous voting can solve these problems. If I want to vote for more than one issue, I should be able to. If I want to put more than weight to certain issues, I should be able to. And I think we will get that, and I think it will be enabled and it will be opt-in because of early adopters, and they have this app that can vote for them for this party. So I think it's coming. I just can't wait.
Do you know if Flux has some kind of anonymity feature?
Totally, yeah. So it's totally anonymous. It's a secret ballot. It prevents man in the middle. It's got a whole bunch of features, and it's designed for governments. It's not centralized. It's decentralized. Yeah. So it's you just submit a transaction to the blockchain, and it's blockchain agnostic.
No, I have been like looking for this kind of solutions for a long time, and it's crazy when you ask to the people that it exists. There are so many that they are now and working, and it's like what I have been losing my time.
I wish I knew more. I'm sorry, I'm trying to share what I know.
But I mean, this one that you talked about before, I didn't find the code, for instance. So maybe it's not open source. Maybe the code is nowhere. I mean, the web is a fancy web with a lot of nice stuff, but we really need an open source, free software, anonymous, decentralized voting system. I think it doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, please tell me I'm wrong.
No, we need it. I agree.
Okay, it's on slightly another topic, but you were just talking about like the problem of electing someone or like some people for 3 years. I think that's mostly a problem. Like it's very bad information aggregation. Like it's very, very bad at just showing our preferences. But if in case we have those solutions that work, so that's like a step further. In case we have those solutions that work, thinking about like how to aggregate information. since we kind of since these are supposed to solve kind of the identity problem, like you can't just like duplicate your identity to vote more. What are your thoughts like on quadratic voting as a better way to aggregate information? I can explain if you don't see what that is. Okay, to explain quadratic voting, it has become quite popular in the crypto space since the Radical Markets book from Glenn Whale. And the basic idea is like everyone gets the same number of vote credits, let's say like 1,000. And for each issue, people are like free to vote, but they can actually buy like many votes on the issue. The thing is, the first vote costs 1, second one is gonna cost 4, and the cost goes up in a quadratic way, which makes it very quickly very expensive to buy many votes. But still, it allows you to express, for example, a strong preference in a certain direction for certain issues. And the goal is to enable minorities to express themselves much stronger on issues that they are concerned with. And for the people that are just like not concerned, they can basically not vote. So it's like a much more flexible way. The main problem with this is if you, for example, use a system like on a blockchain, is you really need a very strong identity system. Otherwise, someone can just like duplicate billions of identities and vote like once every time.
So we're doing a trial in New South Wales at the moment where they're putting your driver's license on the blockchain. So what they've found is that people were forging driver's licenses, and the same way you can't forge a Bitcoin, you can't forge your QR code. And so they're generating a trial where they do your driver's license on the blockchain. So if you can imagine that your driver's license is a form of identity, then you can attribute that to your vote.
Yeah, I think quadratic voting it's awesome. Like it's something you can experiment, and when you have a tool like that, like adding something like this is trivial, right? Like, but first we need like the base layer that allows you to just vote, right? Then you can start like building all sorts of like structures and hierarchies and like quadratic voting or even liquid democracy. Like it's something built on top of that, right? But we need the base systems as default. And regarding identity, if you use decentralized identity, like this comes for free. Like all you need to do is trust an authority, and this authority is who decides the census is. So it just makes the claims necessary to like the identities that can vote, right? Like there's no way you can like I mean, as far as I know.
Yeah, I mean, for the decentralized identity, like usually you're like free to have many different identifiers, like pseudonyms and stuff. So yeah, either like you do need to trust some authority to, for example, like put an official document that certifies, okay, I'm just like one person and I can create other identities with that. That's one way to work. To kind of go like maybe like slightly see what could be possible otherwise. One interesting scheme was introduced. I can't remember which project introduced that. But if you have like your digital identity, like lots of data about yourself, like lots of claims signed by other people, if you can like do private computation on that, it could be possible to try and establish like what's like real data and just like a faked identity that's kind of been generated. It's probably a really hard problem, but that may be the only like decentralized way to provide like civil control on the identity layer.
Like identity doesn't need to be public. Now this is what it's easy to do, but it doesn't need to be public, right? It can be private, and using zero knowledge technologies, you can prove stuff without showing what it is, right? So maybe the first implementations are like not that ideal, but there is no like intrinsic problem there that can't be solved, I think.
So is there any hope for identity and voting that's not tied to the one person, one vote thing, but by some other metric, like that fits well with the idea in Ethereum that you can just generate many addresses for yourself, but still how I could use this system to express a vote and I wouldn't be like, you know, just spamming the system with my many accounts, but that there was some way to feel the weight behind my vote without it being tied to like this person. I guess by weight, you know, right now our votes are weighted by this idea that everyone is equal, and so therefore we should all have one vote for this thing. But unless we have a very good identity system between like, oh, this person is this address and that's their one vote, then that one person weight and like everyone is equal does, you know, that falls down. So how else might we be able to think of the idea in a system where everyone can just create an address? I was just wondering for the group, you know, has anybody thought about this and how else we might be able to express a vote without depending on that individuality thing.
No, I just wanted to add just a small point. There's in Ethereum, there's a standard that's being worked on. It's ERC 725, I think. It's created by the same guy who created ERC 20. And it's this kind of identity that you were mentioning before, where essentially one address can make a bunch of claims about the other address, and as long as you trust that other address, you can trust all those claims about this other guy. That's actually already happening.
That's what we use for our first implementation. We use a 725 and a 735. Those are like basic building blocks for identity. Like those they represent what decentralized identity is, and within this scheme, like you cannot force new identities because basically you have an authority that says who you are, right? We move away from that because this is like fully on-chain identity system, although it can be like work it out. And it requires like several transactions. You need to add keys, and you need to, it is not doable, at least totally not doable on a public blockchain. Maybe doable on a like a proof of authority. But the basic idea behind on these identity systems, the IDs remains, right? And going back to your point, I think like one person, one vote is a horrible solution. Like I think that's a solution for very specific kind of issues, where you vote around values, your own values, not around like any technical or like issue that needs some knowledge, right? I'm more in favor like a fully meritocratic approach where your weight is the weight of your vote is based on the requirements of the merit. I think that's like how we should go towards to, like one person, one vote. I think that makes sense for asking like, how are you, right? That's something that only you can vote, so you can really respond to the questions on what are your values, and that probably can be extrapolated to generate to create an idea, an abstraction of what people care. So that makes sense for me, like one person, one vote, and now we have like this global idea of like what people care, and we can take decisions. Like it's signaling mechanisms. But when it's about to take decisions about the specific issues, my take is like this should be taken by the people that has knowledge about these decisions, right? And defining this merit is very complicated, but I totally think it's doable, like with like decentralized identities and like a good repetition system.
I just want to add one more point. It's first yes, that it's I think you should only be able to vote on the decision that you have knowledge about, but also it's also on the just on the issues that actually concern you. Because for example, if there's a vote coming up about how should the money, I don't know, how should the government split spending between the bicycle lanes and car roads, if I only ever go by train, that doesn't really concern me in any way. Therefore, my vote doesn't really matter as much as another person's on this particular matter. Like I might have like the same amount like of votes overall, but maybe just not on this particular issue.
I agree, and and a way to rephrase that, maybe instead of talking about merit, we should talk about, I was using the word capacities. Maybe you need to know about how like trains and cars works, but you also maybe need to be registered on this neighborhood, and maybe you have to have like the car license for the last 2 years, or maybe like you have to use like public bicycle like the last 2 years. It's like there is no real reason why you cannot quantify these things that you're asking that should be part of this merit, right?
like you can encapsulate like the complexity of what is required to vote like in a single number probably, and that's the hard part. Like it's taking all these metrics and combining them, like making a formula that at the end ends up like with like one single number.
Yeah, right. What I just want to say, like in the marketplace, this works through basically, like if I go to a shop, and for example, for me, I like a particular kind of bananas, and how I express the opinions that when I go to a shop, I buy this kind of bananas, and therefore with my like this one act of purchase is a vote essentially on the marketplace. To explain, hey, please next time have more of these bananas because that's the kind I like, and so I think it would be interesting to have something similar in the voting space. Just probably not based on money, but on some similar sort of credit.
I think that's what Arwen was mentioning before to Grieve. Just like where do you put your taxes is such a like powerful like mechanism for voting. Chris said that we should close up. Does anyone has an insight?
I'm going to do a conclusion by just relating this to a concept I really like, introduced by a very smart guy called Michael Nielsen, who's very interested in what he calls volitional philanthropy, which he defines as the a way to increase. It's a search for how can we increase the number of ways people can act upon the world. And I think that's generally what we should tend for with like this thinking about voting. It's about how to empower people to express their opinions much better, and how to use these to then have a real impact upon the world they live in. Good.
Thank you guys so much. That was really great. Sorry I had to leave in the middle there. I always have this.
Thanks for all the panels here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Thanks, man. Yeah, and thank you guys for diving in. And yeah, no, right? It's always better when you can create your own conference, right? That's the dream. Who needs these speakers? This guy, man. We were supposed to have one more talk, and about anonymous messaging, which would have been really amazing, but Sebastian will have to save it for next time.
Next time I'll be there on time and actually like follow Griff a bit more like carefully and not just let him know like a week in advance when everything is already set up.
Yeah. No. Well, the organizers told me about 5 hours ago that the venue was closed at 6. So, oh well. But yeah, thank you. And thank you for watching.